Hey there, tonight we're diving into the chaotic world of a Renaissance workshop, where the truth is, your dreams of being an artistic apprentice would likely end in blistered hands and sawdust-covered aspirations. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now find your comfort zone, perhaps turn on a fan for that gentle background hum, and let's venture into tonight's story together. A rooster with a questionable sense of timing has just yanked you from your dreams. Welcome to the 15th century Renaissance workshop, where the concept of sleeping in is as mythical as unicorns. The sun isn't even fully up, but you are, and that's all that matters. You, my friend, are an apprentice in a bustling studio, and the day waits for no one. With groggy eyes and a back that's already protesting, you stumble into the workshop, where the chaos greets you with open arms and a cacophony that could rival a heavy metal concert. Now, if you've ever fantasized about being in a Renaissance art studio, let's pop that bubble right away. You've probably pictured a serene, almost divine space where geniuses like Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo stroll around in flowing robes, pausing occasionally to ponder the mysteries of the universe. Reality check. That romantic vision is about as accurate as a medieval map. Here, it's less about divine inspiration and more about the relentless grind, with a side of stress-induced sweat. As you step inside, the air is thick with the smell of linseed oil and tempera, a scent that's somehow both invigorating and nauseating. The master, your boss, is already barking orders. He's the one who calls the shots, and you're here to make sure his grand vision doesn't come crashing down like a poorly constructed house of cards. The hierarchy is as rigid as those stone statues Michelangelo carves, and you're firmly at the bottom. Your tasks, let's just say they aren't exactly what dreams are made of. Forget about holding a brush or chiseling marble. Your morning kicks off with the glamorous job of sweeping the floor. Yes, that's right. You're basically the Renaissance equivalent of a Roomba, and don't even think about slacking off. The floors need to be ready for the master artists to work their magic, or for someone to spill something, which is more likely. You also spend time grinding pigments, a task that builds character, or so they tell you. It's a laborious process involving minerals like lapis lazuli, which fetches a price that could make a banker weep. We're talking about a cost equivalent to $100 per gram today. That's right, you're literally grinding money into powder. Speaking of grinding, let's talk about those hours. Forget the concept of a standard workday. Here, you're on the clock from dusk till dawn and then some. We're talking 14-hour days, 6 days a week. Sunday is your day of rest, but by then, you're so exhausted you might as well be comatose. The masters, they've got deadlines, patrons to impress, and bills to pay. Remember, art in the Renaissance is as much about economics as it is about aesthetics. Artists are at the mercy of wealthy patrons who have a penchant for finicky demands and a tight grip on their purse strings. The social dynamics are just as intense. You're not just learning how to mix paints or stretch canvas. You're learning how to navigate the intricate web of workshop politics. The master artist is your mentor, but he's also a competitor, carefully guarding his secrets while expecting you to absorb everything through osmosis. Meanwhile, you're rubbing elbows and sometimes clashing with fellow apprentices. It's a bit like being in a reality TV show, minus the cameras and with a lot more paint stains. Oh, and let's not forget the noise. It's constant, like a medieval symphony of hammering, sawing, and the occasional curse in Italian or Latin. The workshop is alive, pulsating with energy and chaos. You can almost feel the pressure in the air, a tangible force that pushes everyone to their limits. Achievements here are hard-won, and every piece of art is a testament to sweat, skill, and a dash of insanity. So why do it? Why subject yourself to this grueling existence? Because at the heart of it, despite the hierarchy and the back-breaking work, there's a spark. It's the allure of creation, the chance to be part of something that defies time. Sure, you're not the one signing your name on a masterpiece, but you're part of the process, a cog in the great machine of art history. And let's be honest, there's a certain thrill in knowing that one day, people might stand in awe before a piece you helped bring to life, even if they never know your name. For now, though, you've got floors to sweep, pigments to grind, and a day that's just beginning to unfold in all its chaotic splendor. The Renaissance workshop is a world unto itself, a place where the mundane and the magnificent collide. It's a far cry from the romantic vision, but it's real, gritty, and a testament to human creativity under pressure. So tighten your apron and grab that broom. It's going to be a long, fascinating day. Now that you've got that broom in hand, let's talk about the real stars of the Renaissance workshop, the tools. Forget your rose-tinted illusions of artists effortlessly conjuring masterpieces with a flick of the wrist. Here, every creation is a grueling saga of sweat, skill, and a hint of insanity, with tools playing both hero and villain. First up, the paintbrush. Ah, the humble tool that transforms mere mortals into magicians, or so the myth goes. In reality, these brushes are more like divas with an attitude, crafted with the finest squirrel hair or hog bristles, meticulously bound to wooden handles. They're not just tools, they're investments. A decent set could cost as much as a month's wage for a skilled worker back then, so you don't just toss them around like confetti. Oh no, these are treated with more reverence than a bishop's robe. Each brush is a testament to patience and precision, two things you'd better have in spades if you expect to survive in this world. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Before you even touch a brush, you're probably stuck with the grunt work of making them. Picture this. You're elbow deep in glue, painstakingly aligning the hairs. One wrong move and your future as an artist could end up as a hairy mess. And speaking of glue, it's not the nonchalant stuff you buy in a tube today. Back then, you're boiling down animal bones and skins, and believe me, the aroma is anything but artful. Now, if you think the brushes are tricky, wait until you meet the saws. These aren't your garden variety tools. They're medieval powerhouses capable of slicing through marble like butter, assuming you've got the muscle and technique, of course. Craftsmen wielding these saws are a breed apart, with forearms like tree trunks and a focus sharper than the blades themselves. This isn't just about brute strength, it's about the finesse of a surgeon. One slip and you're looking at a very expensive mistake, not to mention a potential trip to the barber surgeon. Yes, the Renaissance version of a hospital visit, where getting a haircut might also involve losing a limb. And let's not forget the chisels, those deceptively simple slices of metal that are the unsung heroes of sculpture. Each chisel is hand-forged by blacksmiths, who are the unsung artists behind the artists. These tools come in a dizzying array of shapes and sizes, each designed for a specific purpose, whether it's roughing out a block of marble or adding the final, delicate details to a statue's flowing robes. The cost of these tools, let's just say you'd better hope your patron has deep pockets or that you've got a side hustle selling indulgences. Speaking of finances, let's dive into the economics of art supplies. Picture yourself in the marketplace, where pigments are traded like precious commodities. Lapis lazuli, the rock star of pigments, is imported all the way from Afghanistan. You thought $100 a gram was pricey. Imagine shelling out an entire year's rent for a pound of it. This stuff is so valuable that artists often reserve it for the Virgin Mary's robes, a nod to its divine status. And then there's vermilion, derived from mercury sulfide, which literally costs you your health if you're not careful. It's like playing Russian roulette with your palate. Pigments aren't just bought, they're painstakingly crafted. You'll spend hours grinding minerals until they're as fine as dust, mixing them with oils or egg yolk to create paint. It's a task that demands the patience of a saint and the stamina of a marathon runner. And don't even think about taking shortcuts. Quality control in a Renaissance workshop is stricter than a Swiss clockmaker's standards. One bad batch, and you're looking at a very unhappy master, and possibly an even unhappier patron. Now, let's talk about the guilds, the gatekeepers of this whole artistic enterprise. Think of them as the Renaissance version of trade unions, but with a lot more power and a penchant for secrecy. These organizations control everything from who gets to call themselves a master to who can sell art supplies. They're the reason you're spending your days grinding pigments instead of painting masterpieces. The guilds ensure that knowledge is passed down through a rigid hierarchy, with novices apprenticing for years before they are deemed worthy of advancing. The guild system isn't just about maintaining standards, it's about maintaining control. They dictate the flow of materials, ensuring that only those within their ranks have access to the best supplies. It's a system that keeps the market stable, but it's also one that stifles innovation. You want to try a new technique or experiment with colors? Good luck getting that past the guild elders. Tradition reigns supreme, and any deviation is viewed with suspicion. But here's the kicker. The guilds are also a source of protection. They negotiate prices with patrons, ensuring that artists aren't completely at the mercy of the whims of the rich and powerful. They provide training and support, a safety net in a world where failure often means financial ruin. In this cutthroat environment, the guilds are both your greatest ally and your biggest obstacle, a paradox that defines much of the Renaissance. So, as you stand there with your broom, surrounded by the cacophony of the workshop, the path to mastery seems as distant as the stars. But every tool you touch, every pigment you grind, is a step closer to that elusive goal. It's a world of contradictions, where beauty is born from chaos and creativity is shackled by tradition. Yet, for all its hardships, there's a certain magic in being part of this grand tapestry, a thrill in knowing that, one day, your work might stand the test of time. For now, though, it's back to sweeping, grinding, and dreaming of the day when you'll pick up a brush of your own. As you stand there with your broom, surrounded by the cacophony of the workshop, the path to mastery seems as distant as the stars. But every tool you touch, every pigment you grind, is a step closer to that elusive goal. It's a world of contradictions, where beauty is born from chaos and creativity is shackled by tradition. Yet, for all its hardships, there's a certain magic in being part of this grand tapestry, a thrill in knowing that, one day, your work might stand the test of time. For now, though, it's back to sweeping, grinding, and dreaming of the day when you'll pick up a brush of your own. But hey, the sun has finally decided to clock in, and so must you. Midday in the Renaissance workshop is when things really kick into high gear. You're juggling tasks like an overworked circus performer, minus the applause. First up, grinding pigments. Again, but don't roll your eyes just yet. This isn't merely busy work, it's an art form in its own right. Each stroke of the pestle is a delicate balance between power and precision. You're not just pulverizing rocks, you're unlocking their potential to transform blank canvases into masterpieces. Think of it as alchemy, minus the dubious quest for eternal life. Speaking of canvases, let's talk about preparing them. This isn't a quick slap of paint and boom, instant Michelangelo. Oh no, this is a multi-layered affair requiring patience that would make a monk proud. You start with the canvas, often linen, stretched across a wooden frame. Then comes the gesso, a chalky concoction that needs to be applied in layers. Each coat must dry before the next, creating a smooth surface ready to capture the whims of the master. And let's not forget the sanding, hours of it. By the time you're done, that canvas is smoother than a politician's promise. Now, while you're elbow deep in gesso, let's take a moment to observe the social dynamics unfolding around you. The master artist, your boss, is the unquestioned king of this creative kingdom. His word is law, and you'd better believe that defying him is as risky as eating seafood in a landlocked country. But here's the twist. The master isn't just your tyrant, he's also your teacher, albeit one with a penchant for keeping his secrets close to his chest. You're expected to learn by watching, by doing, and by not messing up. Then there are your fellow apprentices, a motley crew of dreamers and schemers, each vying for the master's approval like contestants on a reality show. It's a cutthroat world. Everyone's competing for the same scraps of praise and opportunity. Rumor has it, in some workshops, apprentices have been known to sabotage each other's work. I mean, knew that Renaissance art studios had more drama than a daytime soap opera. But the stakes are high. The dream of becoming a master artist isn't just about wielding a brush with finesse. It's about achieving financial stability and social mobility in a world where both are as elusive as a winning lottery ticket. So, you play the game, balancing camaraderie with competition, hoping that your dedication will one day pay off. As the day grinds on, so does the pressure. The workshop is a buzzing hive of activity, the air thick with the urgency of creation. There's no room for mistakes here, not when patrons are breathing down the master's neck, demanding finished works like yesterday. Deadlines are as tight as the corsets worn by the aristocracy, and the stress is palpable. Every stroke of the brush, every cut of the chisel carries the weight of expectation. One slip, and the whole enterprise could unravel faster than a poorly woven tapestry. And let's not forget the ever-present danger lurking in the tools of the trade. A chisel is not just an instrument of creation, it's a potential weapon of self-destruction. One careless swing, and you're looking at a visit to the barber surgeon, an experience about as pleasant as a tax audit. Your hands, your greatest asset, are also your greatest vulnerability. Every artist knows that a single injury could spell the end of a career before it even begins. Yet, despite the chaos, the competition, and the constant threat of bodily harm, there's an undeniable allure to this world. It's the thrill of creation, the chance to leave a mark on history, even if it's just a smudge in the corner of a grand masterpiece. You're part of something larger than yourself, contributing to a legacy that will outlive you by centuries. So, as the sun begins its slow descent, casting long shadows across the workshop, you pause for a moment to catch your breath. You've survived another day in this whirlwind of art and ambition, and that's no small feat. Tomorrow, you'll be back at it, grinding, painting, and striving for that elusive goal of mastery. But for now, you can take a moment to appreciate the beauty in the chaos, the magic in the mundane. In this world, every brushstroke, every carefully mixed pigment is a testament to human creativity and resilience. It's a reminder that art isn't just about the finished product. It's about the journey, the struggle, and the countless untold stories that lie beneath the surface. So, as you lay down your tools and head for the door, remember that you're part of a grand tradition, a tapestry woven from dreams and determination. As you step into the cool evening air, the workshop's cacophony fades behind you, replaced by the gentle murmur of the city. For a moment, you allow yourself to dream, to imagine a future where your name might be whispered alongside the greats. It's a long road ahead, but you're on it, one step at a time, forging your own path in the shadow of giants. And who knows, maybe one day your work will hang in a gallery, admired by generations yet to come. Until then, it's back to the grind, literally and figuratively, in the relentless pursuit of art and excellence. As you step into the evening air, the city hums with life. The workshop's chaos fades, but don't get too comfortable. This is Renaissance Italy, where the artist's journey is anything but serene. The afternoon slump hits like a carriage full of lead, but rest. That's for people who aren't aspiring to greatness. In this world, you're juggling the demands of patrons who wouldn't notice a masterpiece if it bit them, and the ever-watchful eye of the church, which could snuff out your career faster than you can say, heresy. Let's dive into the political and religious influences on art, shall we? Picture this. You're Leonardo da Vinci, and you've just finished a stunning altarpiece. Enter the patron, a noble with more opinions than titles. He wants changes, and he's not asking. You see, art in the Renaissance isn't just about personal expression. It's a high-stakes game of survival where strategic alliances can make or break you. Fail to please a patron, and you might as well be painting in a cave somewhere. The Medici family, Florence's answer to the mafia meets Silicon Valley investors, are the big shots. Secure their favor, and you're golden. Upset them. Well, let's just say there are more comfortable places to be than out of favor in Florence. But it's not just the patrons with their whims and fancies. The church also has a vested interest in what you're putting on that canvas. While today we might see art as a free-flowing river of creativity, back then it was more like a canal with the church as the lark-keeper. They decided what floated and what got sunk. Art wasn't just decoration. It was propaganda, spiritual instruction, and sometimes a tool for control. The Council of Trent in the mid-16th century wasn't just about slapping wrists for bad theology. It laid down rules for art. No more cheeky angels or ambiguous saints. Art had to be clear, direct, and in line with Catholic doctrine. Caught between demanding patrons and a censorious church, how did artists manage? They became diplomats of the brush, forging alliances and navigating political landscapes with the skill of a chess grandmaster. You see, behind every celebrated artist was a network of support. Other artists, patrons, even the odd monk with an eye for a good fresco. It was a world where who you knew mattered almost as much as what you painted. And let's not romanticize the celebrated artist too much. Sure, their names echo through history, but back then, they were often more like small business owners than solitary geniuses. Michelangelo, for instance, had a workshop full of assistants, apprentices, and laborers, each contributing to the colossal task of creating a Sistine Chapel or a David. These workshops were the startups of the Renaissance, buzzing with activity and sometimes cutthroat competition. You weren't just an artist. You were a manager, a negotiator, and often a bit of a hustler. Now let's talk compromise. Renaissance artists weren't exactly free spirits, painting whatever their hearts desired. They were more like acrobats, balancing their vision with the demands of their patrons. Take Titian, the Venetian master. His patrons wanted portraits that made them look powerful and divine. So Titian obliged, painting them with a divine glow that rivaled a sunset. But here's the kicker. Sometimes he'd sneak in a detail, a knowing glance, or a subtle smirk that hinted at the subject's true nature. It was a delicate dance. Give the patrons what they wanted while keeping a piece of your artistic soul intact. This tightrope act of pleasing patrons while maintaining artistic integrity shaped the very nature of the artwork itself. Artists had to be savvy, adapting to the tastes of the rich and powerful while subtly pushing the boundaries of what was acceptable. For every grand portrait of a duke or duchess, there were countless sketches and studies, drafts that would never see the light of day. Yet, each piece, no matter how compromised, was a stepping stone to something greater. The Renaissance artist was not just a creator, but a negotiator of power, a spinner of stories, both seen and unseen. They were artisans of ambition, crafting not only art, but their own legacy, one brushstroke at a time. So while the myth of the solitary genius persists, the truth is far more complex and infinitely more fascinating. As the sun sets over Florence, casting long shadows across cobblestones and frescoed facades, remember this. The art we admire today is not just the product of individual brilliance. It's a testament to the intricate dance of politics, religion, and economics, a tapestry woven from the threads of ambition, compromise, and creativity. It's a world where every brushstroke is a negotiation, every color a calculated risk. And as you head back to the workshop for another day of grinding pigments and dreams, know that you're part of this grand tradition, an unending pursuit of beauty in a world ruled by power and piety. So take a deep breath and step back inside. The workshop awaits, a microcosm of the Renaissance itself, chaotic, demanding, and above all, alive with the potential of what might be. Tomorrow promises new challenges, new opportunities, and perhaps, just perhaps, a chance to create something that transcends the here and now. But for now, it's back to the grind, as the relentless pursuit of art and excellence continues. As the last brushstroke of the day is finally complete, you breathe a sigh of relief, though it's more of a wheeze at this point. The Renaissance workshop, with its relentless pace and unyielding expectations, has once again taken every ounce of energy you had, and then some. Let's face it, you wouldn't last a day here without feeling like a medieval punching bag. It's not just the physical exhaustion that gets you. It's the mental gymnastics of balancing art, politics, and economics in a world where the stakes are sky high, and the margin for error is thinner than a Florentine wafer. But before you limp home to your straw-stuffed mattress, let's take a moment to reflect on what this grueling day really means. The romanticized vision of the Renaissance artist as a solitary genius, serenely crafting masterpieces while pondering life's great mysteries, is as accurate as a UFO sighting. The truth is, these artists were more like creative athletes, constantly training, competing, and occasionally getting knocked out by the harsh realities of 15th century life. The physical toll of working in a Renaissance workshop is no joke. Imagine spending 14 hours a day bending over canvases, chiseling marble, or mixing pigments, only to wake up and do it all over again. It's like a never-ending boot camp, minus the push-ups but with a lot more dust. And let's not forget the environmental hazards, inhaling toxic fumes from lead-based paints and working in dimly lit, poorly ventilated spaces. Occupational health and safety standards, forget about it. If the paint didn't get you, the cramped conditions and heavy lifting might. Then there's the psychological strain. You're not just an artist. You're a cog in a complex machine where the pressure to produce is relentless. Each piece of art is a high-stakes gamble, and every brushstroke could tip the scales between success and ruin. Patrons expect results, and they're not interested in excuses. If you miss a deadline, you might as well start packing your bags, or worse, your paintbrushes. Financial security is about as stable as a house of cards in a windstorm. And let's talk about the economics. Being a Renaissance artist isn't just about talent. It's about navigating a labyrinthine economic system where art and commerce are inextricably linked. The price of your materials alone could sink a small fortune. Remember that lapis lazuli we mentioned. Its cost could easily rival your annual earnings, and that's just one color in the palette. Meanwhile, patrons hold the purse strings, and they're not shy about yanking them if your work doesn't live up to their lofty expectations. In a world where a single commission could make or break your career, artists had to be as savvy with their finances as they were with their paintbrushes. They negotiated contracts, managed workshops, and sometimes even acted as their own PR agents, all while trying to maintain the integrity of their art. It's a delicate dance of creativity and commerce, where one misstep could send you tumbling into obscurity. Yet, in spite of, or perhaps because of, these daunting challenges, the Renaissance produced some of the most enduring art the world has ever seen. How did these artists manage it? Part of the answer lies in their ability to adapt and innovate within the constraints imposed upon them. They pushed the boundaries of technique and perspective, turning limitations into opportunities for creativity. Michelangelo, for instance, transformed a discarded block of marble into the iconic David, a testament to his ability to see potential where others saw only flaws. But it wasn't just about individual brilliance. The artists of the Renaissance were standing on the shoulders of giants, building upon the work of those who came before them, while also paving the way for future generations. They were part of a larger cultural movement that was reshaping the world, driven by a thirst for knowledge, exploration, and expression. So, while the myth of the solitary, inspired genius may be just that, a myth, the reality is no less impressive. The artists of the Renaissance were part of a vibrant, interconnected web of creativity, commerce, and competition. They faced immense challenges, yet they persevered, driven by a relentless pursuit of excellence and a desire to leave their mark on history. As you finally drag yourself home, with the echoes of the workshop still ringing in your ears, take a moment to appreciate the legacy of those who dared to create in this turbulent era. They may not have had the luxury of sleeping in or leisurely pondering the mysteries of the universe, but they had something even more valuable, the courage to face adversity head-on and the vision to see beyond it. And as you fall into bed, exhausted but fulfilled, remember that the art we admire today is not just a reflection of individual talent. It's a testament to the human spirit, a reminder of our capacity for creativity and resilience in the face of seemingly insurmountable odds. The Renaissance may be over, but its legacy lives on, inspiring us to push the boundaries of what's possible and to create beauty in a world that often feels anything but. So sleep well, dreamer. Tomorrow is another day in the grand tapestry of art and history, and you're part of it, whether you know it or not. Keep grinding those pigments and mixing those paints, because who knows? Maybe one day your work will stand alongside the masters, a testament to the enduring power of human creativity. And if not, well, at least you'll have some really smooth canvases. In the bustling chaos of ancient history, where myths mix with facts like a smoothie gone awry, we find ourselves at the dawn of Carthage, around 814 BC. Yes, we're talking about that iconic city-state that would eventually give Rome a run for its money. But let's rewind to the origins, where we meet the Phoenicians, those ancient maritime maestros who could navigate the Mediterranean like it was their own backyard swimming pool. The Phoenicians hailed from what we now call Lebanon, but these folks weren't content with just chilling on their coastal strip. They wanted more trade, more influence, more of everything. So they did what any expansionist society would do. They set sail. Enter Carthage, the brainchild of one particularly savvy navigator, a woman named Dido, or so the legend goes. Ah, Queen Dido. The tale of her founding Carthage is a splendid piece of fiction, where myth and reality dance an awkward tango. According to Virgil's Aeneid, she fled her homeland after a family squabble that would make even the most dramatic soap operas look tame. She then cleverly acquired land by cutting an ox hide into strips to encircle a hill, a story that's as charming as it is improbable. In reality, it's more likely that Carthage was established as a Phoenician colony to exert control over the western Mediterranean trade routes, moving goods like silver, tin, and the ever-essential purple dye. Yes, purple, the color of royalty, all made possible by smashing thousands of tiny sea snails. Glamorous, right? Now, why was Carthage's geographical position so enviable? It sat near modern-day Tunis in Tunisia, smack dab in the middle of the Mediterranean Sea. This wasn't just a pretty spot for a summer getaway. It was a strategic gold mine. Control the sea, control the trade, control the cash flow. Carthage became a node in a vast network connecting the Iberian Peninsula the Italian boot, North Africa, and the Levant. But Carthage wasn't just about sitting pretty on a map. It was a buzzing hub of economic activity, like the Wall Street of the ancient world, if Wall Street dealt in amphorae instead of stock options. The Carthaginians were the original free traders, engaging in commerce with anyone who was buying. They exported goods like textiles and metals, and imported luxury items like ivory and the aforementioned snail-derived purple dye. And let's not forget the ships Carthage had a fleet that could rival any navy, built for trade and, when necessary, for war. The city's rise was also fueled by its political structure, which was more oligarchic than democratic. The top dogs, known as the Suffites, were elected, but let's be honest, it was an elite club. While this might sound like a recipe for corruption, it actually allowed Carthage to react quickly to market changes and external threats. You see, when you're running a trans-Mediterranean trading empire, you can't afford to get bogged down in endless debates. There's no time to filibuster when you've got goods to move and rivals to outmaneuver. Carthage's influence spread like an ancient version of a viral meme, reaching as far as Sicily and Sardinia. But with great power comes great jealousy, and Carthage's success didn't go unnoticed. The Greek city-states, for example, were less than thrilled about this new maritime powerhouse. Tensions simmered, occasionally boiling over into conflict. But for a time, Carthage thrived, turning its strategic location and economic prowess into a formidable empire. All this success wasn't just due to savvy trading and strategic positioning. Carthaginians weren't above a little divine intervention. Their pantheon was as eclectic as it was demanding, with Baal Hammon as their chief deity, often portrayed with a ram's horns. Yeah, it's not exactly the cuddliest image, but it's fitting for a god overseeing a people who had to be as tough as the sea they navigated. This spiritual backbone gave the Carthaginians a sense of identity, a unifying force that helped them weather both literal and metaphorical storms. So, while the myths of Queen Dido offer a captivating narrative, the reality of Carthage's rise is a testament to human ingenuity and ambition. It's a story of navigation and negotiation, of a city that took full advantage of its resources and location to become a Mediterranean heavyweight. As we set the stage for Carthage's complex history, remember that this was a civilization built on trade, tenacity, and a touch of the theatrical. And the curtain's just going up. And speaking of theatrics, let's set the spotlight on Carthage's economic prowess and military innovations, the real showstoppers in their Mediterranean act. Carthage didn't just waltz into historical fame with a fleet of charming myths and a strategic location. Oh no, they had more tricks up their sleeves than a magician at a birthday party. The heart of their empire was an economy that could rival the efficiency of a modern-day logistics company, if modern logistics involved bartering amphorae of olive oil and wine for silver and tin. Picture this. The Carthaginian economy was like a well-oiled machine, fueled by a heady mix of trade, agriculture, and some good old-fashioned hard work. Their economic model was as diverse as it was effective. They weren't just dealing in luxuries like that snazzy purple duck, had their fingers in every pie, from textiles to metals, and they were the masters of the ancient supply chain game. Their trade networks stretched from the coast of Spain to the heart of the Near East, a web of commerce that would make any modern-day CEO drool. But trade alone wasn't enough to maintain their empire. Carthage's military innovations were the real ace up their sleeve. Their navy was the stuff of legends. Imagine a fleet that could rival the modern-day U.S. Navy, minus the nuclear submarines and aircraft carriers. The Carthaginians developed the quinquereme, a warship with 5 rows of oarsmen, designed to outmaneuver and outmuscle any adversary foolish enough to challenge them. This wasn't just your average boat. It was the ancient world's version of a destroyer fleet, capable of projecting Carthage's power across the Mediterranean with ruthless efficiency. But here's where the plot thickens. Maintaining such a formidable military wasn't just about having the best ships. It was about cold, hard cash. The costs of keeping this naval juggernaut afloat were astronomical, and Carthage's economic engine had to work overtime to cover the bill. They paid their sailors well, understanding that a happy crew was a loyal crew. But the real financial drain came from their reliance on mercenaries, practice that would eventually prove to be both a blessing and a curse. You see, Carthage had a bit of a military manpower problem. Their citizen population wasn't large enough to field a massive standing army, so they turned to mercenaries, hiring troops from across the ancient world. These hired guns came from as far afield as Iberia and Gaul, bringing with them a diverse array of fighting styles and weapons. It was like assembling an ancient version of the Avengers, with the Carthaginians as the Nick Fury of the Mediterranean, orchestrating a multinational force to do their bidding. But while mercenaries could be counted on to fight fiercely, at least as long as the pay was good, this strategy came with significant risks. Loyalty was always a question mark when your soldiers' allegiance could be bought with a few extra shekels, and when the money ran dry, so did their willingness to fight. This reliance on mercenaries was a double-edged sword, providing Carthage with a versatile and powerful military, but also leaving them vulnerable to the whims of their hired help. So, while the romance of Carthage's military might is undeniable, the reality was a constant balancing act, juggling the demands of their economy with the needs of their military machine. It's a tale of innovation and ambition, of a city that reached for the stars but had to keep one eye on the ledger. As we dive deeper into Carthage's story, remember that behind every great empire lies a web of complex, often harsh realities, where the line between success and failure is as thin as a ship's hull. In the grand chess game of ancient geopolitics, Carthage played their pieces with skill and cunning, but even the best-laid plans can be undone by unforeseen challenges. Their reliance on mercenaries, while initially a stroke of genius, would eventually lead to cracks in their armor. But that's a story for another day. For now, just know that Carthage's rise wasn't just about flashy ships and clever trade routes. It was about an empire that dared to dream big, even when the odds were stacked against them. As Carthage tried to navigate the choppy waters of Mediterranean empire building, they weren't just relying on their naval prowess or trade acumen. Oh no, they had a secret weapon in their arsenal, a government structure that would make modern political scientists raise an eyebrow or two. You see, Carthage wasn't just some haphazard collection of merchants and mariners. They had a system, one that was as unique as it was convoluted. At the heart of this political circus was the Council of 104, a body that sounds more like a comic book supervillain group than a governing institution. These were the folks pulling the strings, the ultimate puppet masters of Carthaginian politics. They were a council of judges, but their power wasn't just judicial. They had a say in pretty much everything. Think of them as the ancient equivalent of a board of directors, but with more intrigue and fewer PowerPoint presentations. The Council of 104 was essentially a gerontocracy, a government ruled by the old, and presumably the wise. These guys were elected for life, which means they could wield power until they were carted off in a funeral procession. It's a bit like a Supreme Court with no retirement age, only instead of interpreting laws, they were interpreting the best way to squeeze the maximum profit out of their trade routes. And if that meant a little backstabbing or bribery along the way, well, who's counting? Interestingly, Carthage had two Suffites, or magistrates, who were elected annually. These officials were supposed to be the executive duo, but in reality, they had about as much power as a figurehead monarch. The real decisions were made behind closed doors by the council, in smoke-filled rooms, minus the smoke, of course, because incense was expensive. The Suffites were more like the public face of Carthaginian governance, shaking hands and kissing babies while the council plotted their next move. Now, if you're thinking this sounds a bit like a modern corporate board meeting, you're right on the money. Carthaginian politics was all about pragmatism and profit. They weren't interested in the democratic ideals of Athens or the militaristic virtues of Sparta. Carthage was an oligarchy, pure and simple, with power concentrated in the hands of the wealthy elite. Their government wasn't designed for idealism. It was designed for efficiency. And speaking of efficiency, let's talk about the societal factors that helped Carthage rise to prominence. Religion played a significant role, but not in the way you might think. The Carthaginians were famously pragmatic about their deities. Sure, they worshipped Baal, Hammon, and Tanit, but their religious practices were less about spiritual enlightenment and more about securing divine favor for their earthly endeavors. It was a transactional relationship, much like their trade deals. Need a successful harvest? Offer a sacrifice. Want victory in battle? Better make it a big one. Daily life in Carthage was a blend of the ordinary and the extraordinary. Picture a bustling city where traders haggled over the price of olive oil, while priests sacrificed animals to appease the gods. The streets were alive with the sounds of commerce, the smells of exotic spices, and the constant buzz of conversation. It was a place where cultures collided, where Phoenician, Greek, and African influences mingled in a melting pot of ideas and innovations. Carthage was also a society that valued education, especially for those with the means to afford it. They had schools where young Carthaginians could learn the art of negotiation, the science of navigation, and the subtlety of diplomacy. It was a city that recognized the importance of knowledge, not just as a tool for personal advancement, but as a weapon in the arsenal of empire building. Now, let's debunk a myth or two. One persistent legend is that Carthage was a city obsessed with wealth to the point of avarice. While it's true they were shrewd traders, their society wasn't just about hoarding gold and silver. They invested in infrastructure, building roads and harbors that facilitated trade and communication. They understood that a thriving economy required more than just piles of treasure. It needed the means to move goods efficiently and effectively. Carthage also had its share of social challenges. The gap between the wealthy elite and the common folk was as wide as the Mediterranean itself. This wasn't a society of equals. It was a place where status mattered, where your birthright could determine your opportunities. But despite these inequalities, Carthage thrived, driven by the ambition and ingenuity of its people. So, while Carthage's political system might seem like a relic of a bygone era, it was surprisingly modern in its focus on efficiency and pragmatism. Their society was a complex tapestry of cultural influences, religious practices, and economic priorities, all woven together in a way that propelled them to the forefront of ancient Mediterranean power. As we continue to explore the rise of this remarkable city, remember that Carthage's story is one of contrasts and contradictions, where the past and the present intermingle in a dance as intricate as any ancient ritual. As we continue our journey through the annals of Carthaginian history, it's time to shift gears and dive into the epic saga of the Punic Wars, a trilogy so intense it makes The Godfather look like a Sunday picnic. This is where Carthage's ambitions and Rome's rising power collided in a series of seismic showdowns that would shake the ancient world to its core. Picture it, two Mediterranean powerhouses, each convinced they were the rightful rulers of the known world, squaring off in a battle royale that would span over a century. Let's start with the First Punic War, kicking off in 264 BC. This was essentially the Mediterranean's longest and most destructive family feud, and it all began over Sicily, a juicy chunk of real estate both Rome and Carthage had their eyes on. Sicily was the ancient version of beachfront property, strategically positioned and fertile, perfect for growing all those olives and grapes everyone was so keen on. The island was a hodgepodge of different cultures, including Greek city-states, and it was the perfect tinderbox for conflict. Rome, the new kid on the block with an ambition as vast as their Senate's ego, saw their chance to flex some military muscle. Carthage, on the other hand, was already a seasoned player with a navy that could block out the sun. What Rome lacked in naval prowess, they made up for with sheer stubbornness and a knack for innovation. So, what did they do? They took a captured Carthaginian ship, reverse-engineered it, and built a fleet of their own. Talk about learning on the job. The Romans even added a little something extra, a corvus or crow. This was a nifty device that allowed Roman soldiers to board enemy ships and turn naval battles into land battles. Imagine a giant boarding plank with a spike on the end, perfect for making a dramatic entrance. And wouldn't you know it, this contraption helped them snag a victory at the Battle of Mylae in 260 BC, their first major naval win. Not bad for a bunch of landlubbers. Of course, the war wasn't all about naval battles. There were plenty of land skirmishes too, and both sides suffered heavy losses. By the time the first act wrapped in 241 BC, Rome had managed to bleed Carthage dry, forcing them to cough up a hefty indemnity of 200 talents of silver. That's about 82,000 pounds of silver, enough to make Scrooge McDuck's money bin look like a piggy bank. With the First Punic War in the rearview mirror, you'd think Carthage might have considered a career change. Not quite. Enter the Second Punic War, where things really heat up. This time, it's personal, and the star of our show is none other than Hannibal Barca. Now, here's a guy who knew how to make an entrance. In 218 BC, Hannibal decided to march an army, including those infamous elephants, over the Alps to take the fight straight to Rome's doorstep. Let's take a moment to appreciate the sheer audacity of this plan. Crossing the Alps with a bunch of war elephants isn't just ambitious, it's downright nuts. But Hannibal wasn't one to shy away from a challenge. He started with about 50,000 infantry, 9,000 cavalry, and 37 elephants. By the time he reached Italy, his forces were battered, frostbitten, and significantly smaller, but Hannibal was just getting warmed up. Despite the hardships, Hannibal pulled off a series of stunning victories on Roman soil, including the Battle of Cannae in 216 BC, where he inflicted one of the worst defeats in Roman history. It was a masterclass in strategy, with Hannibal's forces enveloping the Roman legions in a maneuver that would be studied by military tacticians for centuries. The Roman losses were staggering. Estimates suggest around 50,000 to 70,000 Roman soldiers were killed or captured in a single day. But as any good strategist knows, winning battles doesn't always mean winning the war. While Hannibal rampaged through Italy, Rome played the long game, refusing to meet him in pitched battle again. Instead, they took a page out of the Carthaginian playbook and focused on cutting off his supply lines and chipping away at his allies. It was a war of attrition, and Rome was in it for the long haul. Meanwhile, back in Carthage, things weren't exactly peaky. Their reliance on mercenaries was starting to bite them in the backside. Mercenaries, it turns out, aren't the most reliable bunch when the paychecks start coming, and Carthage was struggling to keep the coffers full. Not to mention, the Roman PR machine was working overtime to paint Carthage as the villain of the piece, a narrative that would stick around longer than a bad penny. Eventually, the tide turned. In 204 BC, the Romans decided to take the fight to Carthage, led by their own superstar general, Scipio Africanus. By 202 BC, they met Hannibal at Zama, and this time it was the Carthaginians who were outmaneuvered. Hannibal's war elephants were no match for the Roman legions, and Carthage was finally brought to heel. The terms were harsh. Carthage had to surrender its fleet, pay yet another massive indemnity, and most humiliating of all, ask Rome's permission before going to war again. As the dust settled on the Second Punic War, Carthage found itself in a precarious position. Their power was diminished, their economy in tatters, and their reputation tarnished. But they weren't out of the game just yet. Despite the odds, Carthage would continue to rebuild and adapt, like a cat with 9 lives, always finding a way to land on its feet. And while the legend of Hannibal would grow, the reality was that Carthage's fate was increasingly tied to the whims of Rome, a relationship as fraught as it was inevitable. So there you have it, the Punic Wars, a saga of ambition, betrayal, and elephants in snow. As we move forward in our exploration of Carthaginian history, keep in mind that the story isn't over. There's still more drama on the horizon, and the stage is set for our final act. Until then, remember that history is as much about the myths we create as it is about the truths we uncover. And sometimes, the line between the two is as thin as a Carthaginian silver coin. While Hannibal's elephants were likely still nursing a grudge against the Alps, the real drama was yet to unfold back in Carthage. As the Third Punic War loomed on the horizon, Rome was sharpening its knives, all too ready to carve up whatever was left of Carthaginian pride. You see, despite losing 2 big wars, Carthage had a pesky habit of bouncing back, like that one friend who just won't leave the party. Their economy started humming again, agriculture, trade, you name it. But when they dared to defend themselves against aggressive neighbors without Roman permission, the Senate's patience wore thin. In 149 BC, Rome decided enough was enough. They came knocking with legions and a new demand. Carthage must be destroyed. The Romans might as well have sent a Dear John letter, but with more fire and less sentiment. The Carthaginians, understandably, weren't thrilled about the idea of self-immolation, so they hunkered down for a brutal siege that would make even Homer wince. For 3 long years, Carthage resisted, turning their city into a fortress, their darks a war machine, their spirit unbroken. It was like a last stand in a Greek tragedy, with a bit more grit and a lot less poetry. By 146 BC, the Romans, led by Scipio Aemilianus, grandson of the Scipio who had bested Hannibal, breached Carthage's defenses. And then came the destruction, a scorched earth spectacle that would define Rome's ruthless efficiency. The city was razed, its people killed or sold into slavery, and its land salted to prevent anything from growing. Though, let's be honest, the salting bit is probably more myth than reality. Rome wanted Carthage wiped off the map, but they still had to keep the area productive. After all, nothing says victory like turning your enemy's homeland into a profitable Roman province. Yet, as the smoke cleared and the dust settled, something remarkable happened. Carthage, or what was left of it, refused to be forgotten. The ruins became a symbol, a cautionary tale of ambition and hubris. Roman writers like Caro the Elder had long warned of Carthage's potential to rise again, often ending speeches with the ominous Carthago delenda est. Carthage must be destroyed. In a twist of irony, this relentless repetition ensured Carthage's legacy endured even in defeat. The Romans, despite their best efforts, ended up preserving Carthaginian memory in the very act of trying to erase it. Fast forward a few centuries, and the ruins of Carthage became a tourist attraction for the Roman elite. Julius Caesar, perhaps feeling a twinge of nostalgia or pragmatism, ordered the city rebuilt as a Roman colony in 44 BC. By the time Augustus came to power, Carthage was once again a thriving metropolis, albeit under new management. It played a significant role in the grain trade, feeding the burgeoning Roman Empire, and reminding everyone that even in ruins, Carthage had an uncanny knack for bouncing back. It was like the ancient version of a phoenix with a relentless work ethic and a penchant for commerce. But the enduring influence of Carthage goes beyond its ruins. The Carthaginians were pioneers in economic and military strategies that echo through to modern times. Their expertise in trade logistics and naval warfare set a precedent that many empires would emulate. They understood the power of a strong navy, not just for defense, but as a tool for economic dominance. Their mercantile spirit, the backbone of their empire, laid the groundwork for future powers to build on, Rome included. In the military sphere, the lessons of Hannibal's campaigns weren't lost on the Romans. His tactics, especially at Cannae, became a staple in military academies for centuries, admired for their brilliance and audacity. The idea of using strategic ingenuity to overcome numerical inferiority is as relevant today as it was back then. Hannibal's legacy lives on, not just in history books, but in the strategies of generals who followed. Economically, Carthage's model of diverse trade networks and adaptable commerce is something modern economies can relate to. They were the original globalization gurus, understanding that prosperity lay in connectivity. Their ability to pivot and adapt, even in the face of adversity, is a lesson in resilience that resonates through the ages. In many ways, Carthage's story is a testament to the enduring power of innovation and adaptability, principles that are as crucial today as they were in the ancient world. So here we are, standing among the ruins of an empire that refused to fade quietly into history. Carthage's tale is one of ambition and resilience, of a civilization that dared to dream big and, despite its fall, left an indelible mark on the world. It's a reminder that history isn't just about the rise and fall of empires. It's about the legacies they leave behind, the lessons they impart, and the timeless truth that even in defeat there can be victory. As we close this chapter on Carthaginian history, remember that the echoes of the past are never truly silent. They continue to shape the present, whispering their stories to those willing to listen. If you've ever felt like you were stuck in the middle of nowhere, spare a thought for the Sogdians, who turned their geographical predicament into a golden opportunity. Nestled in what we now call Uzbekistan and Tajikistan, these ancient traders had a knack for making their seemingly barren homeland the bustling epicenter of the Silk Road. And no, they didn't do it by accident or sheer luck. It was a masterclass in strategic planning that would make modern-day CEOs green with envy. Let's set the scene. Around 1000 BCE, Sogdiana was already a melting pot of cultures and languages, thanks to its prime real estate between the major civilizations of the East and West. The Sogdians knew they weren't sitting on fertile lands bursting with natural resources. Instead, they had something far more valuable: location, location, location. Situated between the Chinese Han Empire and the Roman Empire, they were perfectly poised to become the middlemen of the ancient world, a role they embraced with gusto. But hold your horses, or rather, your camels, because we're not just talking about a few dusty caravans dragging their feet through the desert. The Silk Road wasn't a single road, but a sprawling network of trade routes stretching over 4,000 miles. It was the ancient version of a global highway, connecting everything from luxury silks and spices to ideas and innovations. And the Sogdians were its most enthusiastic drivers, if you will, keeping the wheels of commerce turning for over a millennium. While the glitz of silk and gold often grabs the headlines, the real magic of the Sogdian trade lay in the mundane. They were masters of logistics before the word even existed. Think FedEx, but with camels instead of cargo planes. These savvy traders knew that the key to success was not just in the goods themselves, but in how they moved them. They established a series of trading posts and rest stops along their routes, which were crucial in keeping the caravans supplied and the trade flowing smoothly. It was a sophisticated operation that required meticulous planning and coordination, not to mention a good sense of humor to deal with the endless bureaucracy and occasional Mongol raid. The Sogdians were also polyglots of the highest order, speaking multiple languages to negotiate with traders from all corners of the known world. This linguistic dexterity wasn't just a party trick, it was a survival skill. They could haggle in Chinese, strike deals in Persian, and wax poetic in Sanskrit, all before breakfast. By being culturally adaptable, they were able to bridge the East and West, not just in trade, but in ideas and technology as well. Now, let's debunk a few myths. It might sound romantic to picture a lone Sogdian trader heroically trudging across the desert with a caravan of treasures, but the reality was far more communal. These trade routes were a bustling hive of activity, filled with merchants, pilgrims, soldiers, and even spies. The Sogdians were part of a larger network, and their success was built on collaboration and negotiation, not solitary heroics. Economically, the Sogdians were like the ancient version of venture capitalists. They didn't just trade goods, they invested in them. They would often take goods on consignment, selling them on behalf of producers, and taking a cut of the profits. This business model allowed them to expand their operations without needing massive amounts of capital up front. It was a smart move that kept their risk low and rewards high, a strategy that would be applauded in any modern business school. In terms of societal structure, the Sogdians were an eclectic mix of cultures and religions. Zoroastrianism was the dominant faith, but they were remarkably open to other beliefs, including Buddhism, Manichaeism, and Nestorian Christianity. This religious pluralism wasn't just a stroke of liberal genius, it was a practical necessity. By embracing a range of beliefs, the Sogdians could better integrate into the various cultures they traded with, making them more effective diplomats and negotiators. But let's not paint too rosy a picture. Life along the Silk Road was fraught with danger, from bandits and disease to the whims of capricious rulers. The Sogdians had to be nimble, not just in trade, but in politics. They maintained a delicate balance of power with the empires that surrounded them, using their skills in diplomacy to keep the peace and their trade routes open. It was a high-stakes game of chess, and the Sogdians were seasoned players. The legacy of the Sogdian traders is a testament to the power of commerce to transcend boundaries and connect disparate cultures. They weren't just traders, they were cultural ambassadors, spreading ideas and innovations that would shape the course of history. And while they might not be as famous as their contemporaries in Rome or China, their influence was just as profound. So next time you're stuck in traffic, remember the Sogdians, who turned their middle of nowhere into the center of everything. They exemplified the power of strategic thinking, adaptability, and a good sense of humor, qualities that still resonate today in our interconnected world. And let's be honest, if they could make the deserts of Central Asia the heartbeat of global commerce, maybe there's hope for your morning commute after all. While you're contemplating the existential dread of your morning commute, let's zoom back to the Sogdians, who managed to make traversing thousands of miles of treacherous terrain seem like a walk in the park. How, you ask? Through their economic prowess and trade savvy that would make even the savviest modern moguls take notes. The Sogdians were the Silicon Valley of the ancient world, or maybe the Amazon, given their knack for logistics. They didn't just trade in silk, although that was undoubtedly their showstopper. These folks were the ultimate multitaskers, dealing in everything from spices, precious stones, metals, and even livestock. Picture a bustling bazaar where silks from China mingled with Indian spices and Roman glassware. The Sogdians were the glue holding this eclectic mix together, ensuring that goods flowed seamlessly from one end of the known world to the other. Silk, of course, was the crown jewel. It wasn't just a fabric. It was a status symbol, a currency, and sometimes even a diplomatic tool. The Sogdians were silk's greatest cheerleaders, moving it across distances that would make your head spin, over 4,000 miles from China to the Mediterranean. And let's not forget the spices. These weren't just flavor enhancers. They were the ancient equivalent of gold, sometimes even more valuable. Sogdian traders would haul these aromatic treasures from India and Southeast Asia, making sure the Roman elites had enough pepper for their extravagant feasts. Now, you might be wondering how they managed this logistical feat without the help of GPS or Amazon Prime. Enter the caravan, the ancient world's answer to FedEx trucks. These weren't just a few camels trudging through the desert. They were a veritable convoy, sometimes numbering in the hundreds, each laden with goods and overseen by experienced traders who knew the routes like the back of their hand. These caravans were the backbone of Sogdian trade, and they had to be meticulously organized. Remember, it wasn't just about getting goods from point A to point B. They needed to arrive in sellable condition, which was no small feat given the harsh conditions. And let's talk about those conditions. The Sogdians had to navigate deserts, mountains, and the occasional river, all while avoiding bandits and navigating the complex political landscape of the time. It was a high-wire act that required not just physical endurance, but diplomatic savvy. They had to negotiate passage through various territories, often paying tolls or offering gifts to local rulers. Think of these as ancient shipping fees, except instead of a flat rate, it was more like a haggling session with a side of political intrigue. The economic impact of this trade was staggering. Sogdiana itself became a hub of wealth and culture, its cities bustling with activity and innovation. This prosperity wasn't just felt locally, it rippled out to their neighbors, enriching entire regions along the Silk Road. The influx of wealth allowed the Sogdians to invest in their cities, building grand temples and public works that would make even the most jaded traveler stop and stare. It also fostered a vibrant cultural exchange, as ideas and technologies flowed alongside goods. But let's not get too misty-eyed about this ancient globalization. The reality was that this trade also had its dark side. The wealth generated by the Silk Road often fueled conflict, as various empires and tribes vied for control of these lucrative routes. The Sogdians had to be nimble, not just in trade, but in diplomacy, constantly navigating shifting alliances and power dynamics. It was a testament to their skill that they managed to maintain their autonomy for so long, even as larger empires loomed on the horizon. So, the next time you're grumbling about shipping costs on your latest online splurge, spare a thought for the Sogdians, who turned the harsh realities of ancient trade into a thriving empire. They remind us that with a bit of ingenuity and a lot of grit, even the most daunting challenges can be transformed into golden opportunities. And who knows, maybe your next commute will seem a little less daunting with the spirit of the Sogdians at your side. The Sogdians, those savvy Silk Road navigators, didn't just rely on their trading prowess to keep the wheels of commerce turning. They were also master diplomats, outmaneuvering larger empires with a finesse that would make even the most seasoned political strategists blush. Imagine a chessboard where the pieces are not just kings and queens, but a multinational cast of traders, soldiers, and rulers, all vying for control of the lucrative Silk Road routes. The Sogdians played this game not with brute strength, but with cunning and charisma. Let's dive into the political swamp of the ancient world, where alliances were as fickle as the weather and rivalries could ignite faster than a dry forest. The Sogdians, perched between the colossal empires of China and Persia, had to navigate a web of shifting loyalties and ever-changing borders. Their homeland, Sogdiana, was like a geopolitical sandwich, squeezed between hungry powers eager to gobble up territory. But instead of getting crushed, the Sogdians turned their precarious position into an asset, crafting alliances and treaties with the precision of a master chef seasoning a dish. One might assume that the Sogdians were just lucky diplomats, charming their way into favor. But let's not romanticize this too much. Diplomacy in ancient times was a gritty affair, more akin to a high-stakes poker game than a polite tea party. These traders weren't just chatting over silk and spices. They were negotiating life and death matters, often with the fate of their cities hanging in the balance. The stakes were high, and the Sogdians played to win, using their deep understanding of human nature and cultural nuances to broker deals that often left their rivals scratching their heads. Take, for instance, their relationship with the Tang dynasty in China. Around the 7th century CE, Sogdian traders became so influential in Chinese markets that they were granted unprecedented privileges. Not only were they allowed to trade freely, but they also served as cultural ambassadors, spreading Zoroastrianism and other beliefs along with their goods. This wasn't just a stroke of luck. This was the result of years of careful diplomacy, where the Sogdians deftly balanced their interests with those of the Chinese, ensuring that both parties benefited from the exchange. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. The Sogdians had to contend with more than just foreign empires. They also faced internal power struggles and rivalries. Their society wasn't a monolithic block of unity. It was a patchwork of city-states, each with its own ambitions and agendas. These internal dynamics required just as much diplomatic finesse as their international dealings. The Sogdians had to juggle alliances between their cities, ensuring that no single power rose to dominate the region. It was a delicate balancing act that required constant vigilance and negotiation. And let's not forget the looming shadow of the Persian Empire, which had its eyes firmly set on Sogdiana's strategic location. The Sogdians, ever the pragmatists, often found themselves in a tug-of-war between Persia and their eastern neighbors. Rather than choosing sides, they opted for a more fluid approach, playing both ends against the middle. This wasn't just a clever tactic. It was a survival strategy, allowing them to maintain a semblance of autonomy while the giants around them clashed. Of course, this dance of diplomacy wasn't without its missteps. There were times when the Sogdians found themselves outmaneuvered, their carefully laid plans thwarted by unforeseen events. But even in these setbacks, they proved resilient, adapting to new circumstances with a flexibility that was the envy of their contemporaries. It was this ability to pivot and adapt that kept them relevant, even as the political landscape shifted beneath their feet. So, while it's tempting to view the Sogdians as romantic figures, gliding gracefully through the corridors of power, the reality was far more complex. They were astute negotiators, navigating a world where allegiances were as stable as a house of cards. Their success wasn't just a matter of charm or luck. It was the result of hard-nosed pragmatism and a keen understanding of the geopolitical chessboard. They knew when to push, when to pull back, and most importantly, when to fold and walk away. In the end, the Sogdians remind us that diplomacy is as much about timing and perception as it is about words and treaties. They were the ultimate realists, recognizing that in a world without GPS or real-time communication, the art of negotiation was not just a skill, but a way of life. As we look back on their legacy, it's clear that their influence extended far beyond the marketplace. They were not just traders, but architects of cultural exchange, shaping the world in ways that still resonate today. Stay tuned, because this roller coaster of ancient diplomacy is far from over. In the next part, we'll dive deeper into the Sogdians' cultural legacy and explore how their ability to adapt and innovate left a lasting mark on the world. The Sogdians, those cultural chameleons of the ancient world, were about to show us how trade wasn't just about haggling over silks and spices. It was a full-blown cultural exchange, a kaleidoscope of religions, ideas, and innovations zipping back and forth along the Silk Road. Imagine a world where a Buddhist monk, a Zoroastrian priest, and a Manichaean merchant could all meet for a cup of fermented mare's milk and a chat about the meaning of life. That's the world the Sogdians helped create, and oh boy, it was a vibrant mess. First off, let's debunk the notion that the Silk Road was just a glorified bazaar. Sure, it was about commerce, but it was also the ancient internet, if you will, a web of knowledge and culture that stretched from the Mediterranean to China. The Sogdians were the modems connecting this mosaic of civilizations, facilitating an exchange of goods and, more importantly, ideas. Picture them as the original influencers, spreading the hardest trends in spirituality and technology across continents. Take Buddhism, for example. It might surprise you, but the Sogdians were instrumental in its dissemination from India to China. Around the 4th century CE, Buddhist monks hitched rides on Sogdian caravans, carrying scriptures and relics that would eventually shape the spiritual landscape of East Asia. These weren't just casual road trips. We're talking about journeys spanning thousands of miles, across deserts and mountains, with bandits lurking at every turn. Yet, the Sogdians were unfazed, providing safe passage and sometimes even converting to Buddhism themselves. This was cultural exchange at its finest, with the Sogdians as the spiritual Uber drivers of antiquity. And let's not forget Zoroastrianism, the ancient Persian religion that the Sogdians carried with them like a badge of honor. They didn't just practice it, they exported it, setting up fire temples from Central Asia to China. Zoroastrianism's dualistic worldview found echoes in Manichaeism, a syncretic religion that the Sogdians also helped spread. Picture this, a Sogdian trader explaining the cosmic battle between light and darkness to a curious audience in a bustling Chinese market. It's a far cry from today's religious infomercials, but the impact was just as profound. Now, while the Sogdians were busy playing spiritual matchmakers, they were also cultural magpies, picking up shiny bits and pieces from each civilization they encountered. This wasn't cultural appropriation, it was cultural appreciation on steroids. Their art and architecture reflected a blend of Persian, Indian, and Chinese influences, creating a unique Sogdian style that was as eclectic as it was exquisite. Think of it as the ancient world's Pinterest board, a collection of the best and brightest from across the Silk Road. But let's not get too misty-eyed about this multicultural utopia. As with any great exchange, there were bound to be misunderstandings and missteps. One of the more amusing tales involves the introduction of paper-making to the West. The Chinese had been using paper since the 2nd century BCE, but it wasn't until a few Sogdian prisoners of war spilled the beans in the 8th century CE that the secret spread. Picture the scene. A Sogdian craftsman, probably under duress, explaining the intricacies of paper-making to a perplexed Arab scribe. It sounds like the plot of a historical comedy, but it underscores the messy, human side of cultural exchange. And then there were the linguistic blunders, those delightful moments when translation goes hilariously wrong. The Sogdians, with their polyglot prowess, were usually a step ahead, but even they weren't immune to the occasional faux pas. Imagine a Sogdian trader confidently negotiating a deal, only to realize that silk and silt sound suspiciously similar when spoken by a foreign tongue. It's a reminder that, while the Sogdians were adept cultural navigators, they were also human, prone to the same slip-ups that make the rest of us chuckle. Yet, these moments of absurdity were the exception, not the rule. The Sogdians' ability to blend and adapt was nothing short of remarkable, a testament to their openness and ingenuity. This wasn't just about survival. It was about thriving in a world that was as unpredictable as it was interconnected. Their cities became melting pots, where merchants and scholars from diverse backgrounds could exchange not just goods, but ideas and innovations that would reshape their world. Economically, this cultural melting pot had far-reaching consequences. The Sogdian cities, bustling with trade and intellectual exchange, became economic powerhouses. Samarkand, the crown jewel of Sogdiana, was renowned for its wealth and sophistication. This wasn't just a city, it was a beacon of prosperity, a testament to the power of intercultural dialogue. Its markets were legendary, offering everything from Chinese silk to Roman glassware, all under the watchful eyes of Sogdian merchants who could haggle in a dozen languages. But the true legacy of the Sogdian cultural exchange wasn't just in the goods that changed hands. It was in the ideas that took root and spread. The Sogdians were more than traders. They were bridges between civilizations, facilitating the flow of knowledge and innovation that would lay the groundwork for future achievements. From the spread of religious doctrines to the adoption of new technologies, the Sogdian influence was felt far and wide, a silent yet powerful force that shaped the ancient world. In the end, the Sogdians remind us that cultural exchange is a two-way street, a dance of give and take that enriches all parties involved. They were the original global citizens, navigating a world of diverse cultures with grace and aplomb. And while their legacy may not be as well known as that of their more famous contemporaries, their impact was just as significant. a testament to the enduring power of curiosity and openness. As we wrap up this chapter and prepare to dive into the next, it's clear that the Sogdian story is far from over. There's still much to explore, from their political machinations to their eventual decline. But for now, let's raise a glass, or a cup of fermented mare's milk, to the Sogdians, those intrepid conduits of culture who showed us that, sometimes, the most valuable things you can trade aren't goods, but ideas. Stay tuned, because the next part of our journey promises to be just as enlightening. As we clink our imaginary glasses to the Sogdians, it's time to face the bittersweet symphony of their decline, a tale as old as time and as predictable as a reality TV show finale. So, buckle up, because we're diving headfirst into the twilight of the Sogdian Empire, a story where the end is as revealing as the journey itself. First, let's set the stage for this grand exit. The Sogdians, those indefatigable traders and cultural brokers, found themselves in a world that was shifting faster than a chameleon on a rainbow. By the 8th century, the political landscape was a veritable hornet's nest of emerging powers and shifting alliances. The Tang dynasty in China, once a reliable partner, began to flex its imperial muscles more aggressively. Meanwhile, the Arab conquests were sweeping through Central Asia like a strategic game of Risk on turbo mode. The Muslim conquests, to be specific, brought seismic changes that would rock the very foundations of Sogdian life. The Battle of Talas in 751 CE, a clash that might not make it to the top of your historical hit parade, was a turning point. This wasn't just a skirmish over real estate. It was the moment when the mighty Tang forces faced off against the Abbasid Caliphate near the Talas River. The Sogdians were caught in the middle, their lush oasis of trade and culture suddenly looking more like a geopolitical bowling pin. The result, a decisive blow to Tang influence in Central Asia and a new chapter in the region's history. The Arab victory opened the floodgates for Islam to spread through the Sogdian territories like wildfire, reshaping the religious and cultural landscape. Zoroastrian fire temples that once dotted the land gradually gave way to mosques as the call to prayer began to echo across the steppe. The Sogdian traders, ever the pragmatists, adapted as best they could, but this was a tectonic shift that no amount of diplomatic finesse could fully mitigate. Economically, the Sogdians faced challenges that would make even the most seasoned CEO break into a cold sweat. The Silk Road, once the backbone of their prosperity, was starting to fray at the edges. New maritime trade routes were emerging, offering faster and sometimes safer alternatives to the perilous land journey. Why risk 1,000 miles of bandit-infested desert when you could sail the high seas with a belly full of rum and a heart full of adventure? This maritime shift wasn't just a logistical nightmare. It was an economic punch to the gut. The Sogdian cities, once bustling hubs of trade, began to see a decline in their fortunes. Samarkand, that jewel of the Silk Road, still sparkled, but with a tad less luster. The relentless march of progress had found a new path, and the caravan trails grew quieter with each passing year. But let's not throw the Sogdians a pity party just yet. Despite the turmoil, they left an indelible mark on the world, an enduring legacy that still resonates today. Their role as cultural connectors set the stage for a more interconnected world, laying the groundwork for globalization long before the term became a corporate buzzword. The Sogdians' knack for adaptation, their ability to blend and thrive amid diversity, is a lesson that echoes through the annals of history. And here's where things get really juicy. The Sogdians might have faded from the forefront, but their influence didn't just vanish into thin air. They had planted seeds of innovation and exchange that would continue to bear fruit long after their cities had fallen into ruin. The spread of paper-making, for instance, transformed the written word in the West, setting the stage for an intellectual renaissance that would rewrite the rules of knowledge and power. Their diplomatic finesse and cultural syncretism also laid the groundwork for future empires and trade networks. The Mongols, who later galloped across the steppes with all the subtlety of a rock concert, would benefit from the roads and relationships the Sogdians had forged. You can almost picture Genghis Khan tipping his cap to those wily traders as he launched his own brand of global commerce, albeit with a bit more swordplay. So, what do we make of the Sogdians? A people who thrived in the spotlight only to slip into the shadows of history. Perhaps their story is a reminder that legacy isn't measured solely by power or permanence. It's about the ripples you create, the connections you forge, and the ideas you spread. The Sogdians may have been forgotten by the grand narratives of empire and conquest, but their true impact lies in the tapestry of trade, culture, and diplomacy they helped weave. In the end, history often forgets its quiet architects, the ones who lay the foundations for what comes next. The Sogdians were such architects, crafting a world that was richer and more connected than the one they inherited. So, as we wrap up our journey through the bustling markets and dusty roads of Central Asia, let's raise a toast to the Sogdians, those unsung heroes of the Silk Road who turned the middle of nowhere into the center of everything. And maybe, just maybe, their story will inspire you to find the hidden connections in your own life, reminding us all that even the smallest trade route can lead to the grandest of adventures. The year is 1347, and Europe's about to get hit with the mother of all pandemics. Yep, the Black Death is rolling into town like an unwelcome guest who doesn't just overstay their welcome, but also redecorates the place in doom and gloom. You, my scholarly friend, are right in the thick of it, armed with the finest medieval medical knowledge, somewhere between leeches and prayer. Here's the scoop. The plague's origins are as exotic as they are terrifying. It all starts in the bustling trade routes of the East, with the disease hitching a ride on fleas living on the backs of rats, nature's least cuddly fur balls. By October 1347, the first reports of the plague land in Europe via the port city of Messina, Sicily. The disease spreads faster than gossip at a medieval market, leaving Europe's population reeling. Spoiler alert, 25 to 30 million souls will soon be looking for a new place to haunt. Now, you might be thinking, how do I, a medieval scholar, navigate this pestilence-ridden landscape? Well, let's dive into the medieval toolkit. You, like many learned folks of the time, might be clutching to the hope that the answer lies in the stars, or perhaps in the mysterious workings of the four humours. That's right, some of your esteemed colleagues are pointing fingers at planetary misalignment, because naturally, Mars and Jupiter having a cosmic spat could totally unleash a pandemic. But let's not forget the infamous theory of miasma, the idea that bad air is to blame. Imagine you're trying to outsmart this invisible enemy by purifying the air with fragrant herbs. Lavender, rosemary, and a dash of superstition, all bundled in a fancy nosebag, might just be your ticket to survival, or at least a more pleasant-smelling demise. As a scholar, you're not just fighting for your own life, but also grappling with the intellectual chaos that the plague brings. Your manuscripts and books, painstakingly copied by hand, are suddenly more valuable than gold, if only because they can be used as kindling when the cold winter nights set in. You find yourself in a bizarre marketplace where ideas, some harebrained and others only slightly less so, are traded like commodities. And you better believe that this is a buyer's market for apocalyptic theories. In the midst of this chaos, you are forced to navigate not just the disease, but also the societal upheaval it causes. Cities are crumbling under the weight of fear and death. Religious fervor reaches fever pitch as some people turn to flagellation, believing that self-inflicted pain might appease whatever divine force is clearly having a bad day. Meanwhile, others, perhaps less inclined to self-harm, indulge in hedonistic pursuits, figuring that if the world's ending, they may as well party until the rats come home. Amidst the chaos, you, dear scholar, are trying to make sense of it all. Perhaps you're penning treatises or engaging in heated debates with fellow thinkers, trying to pinpoint just what in the medieval world is going on. You might even be reaching out to the few surviving physicians who tell you to rub onions or crushed emeralds on the buboes, because when in doubt, why not try a little medieval bling therapy? The plague doesn't discriminate. It challenges kings and commoners alike, reshaping the social fabric of Europe. The labor shortage that follows the pestilence gives the surviving serfs a rare upper hand, demanding better wages and conditions, a tiny silver lining in this otherwise stormy cloud. You, observing from your scholarly perch, note these shifts, perhaps scribbling furiously about the changing world in your plague journal, which, let's face it, is basically the original doom-scrolling. In this swirling maelstrom of disease and despair, you learn that knowledge is both a sword and a shield. It's what keeps you sane, or sanish. And as you peer through your dusty window, watching the world unravel one flea-ridden rat at a time, you can't help but wonder, if the plague is a test, what lesson are you supposed to learn? That question, like the rats scuttling through the streets, lingers in the air, unanswered yet undeniably present. Just as you're pondering the plague's pop quiz on the medieval syllabus, let's zoom out and take a look at the grander scale of chaos it unleashed. Picture the medieval scholar's world, not unlike a university campus today, albeit with fewer coffee shops and more plague pits. Universities were the intellectual powerhouses of the Middle Ages. They were the places where knowledge was brewed, debated, and sometimes thrown out with yesterday's chamber pot. But during the Black Death, these bastions of learning were not immune, pun intended, to the devastation. The economic upheaval was a wild ride. Universities shuddered faster than you can say academic funding cut, with death rates soaring and students and professors alike dropping like flies, or perhaps more fittingly, like fleas off a rat. Many institutions found it impossible to continue operations. Libraries, those sacred halls of scrolls and manuscripts, were neglected. Books became more valuable as firewood than for their wisdom, as heeding took precedence over learning during the harsh winters. And then there was the labor market. Imagine your local job fair suddenly becoming a ghost town. The plague left a gaping hole in the workforce, leading to a labor shortage that flipped the feudal system on its head. Surviving workers, suddenly a rare commodity, demanded higher wages and better conditions. It was the medieval version of a workers' strike, though less organized and more desperate. This shift in power dynamics was enough to make any feudal lord break out in a sweat, or at least wish they could afford to. For scholars, this was a time of adaptation. If your local university had closed its doors, you might find yourself in an unexpected new role. Some scholars became tutors or advisors to the wealthy, exchanging the lecture hall for the opulent, and hopefully less rat-infested, confines of noble estates. Others, perhaps less fortunate, took on roles far removed from their academic expertise. You could end up managing an estate, or even taking on a clerical position within the church, where your ability to read and write was suddenly in high demand. Those with a penchant for travel might have fled to quieter, safer locales, seeking refuge in the countryside where the plague's grip was less firm. Think of it as an early form of remote work, minus the Wi-Fi. But make no mistake, this was no idyllic escape, more like a desperate bid for survival. And yet, human resilience being what it is, many scholars continued their work in whatever capacity they could, scribbling notes by candlelight, debating philosophy with anyone who would listen, or simply trying to preserve what knowledge they could amidst the chaos. Desperate times called for desperate measures, and some of the lengths to which scholars went to maintain their work were nothing short of comical. Picture a philosopher, determined to finish his treatise on ethics, donning a plague doctor's mask as he penned his thoughts in a makeshift study far from the madding crowd. Or imagine a mathematician attempting to calculate the spread of the plague using nothing but an abacus and sheer determination, while a rat scuttles across his desk in search of crumbs. And let's not forget the more unusual methods of self-preservation. Our scholarly friends were known to concoct bizarre remedies in the quest for plague-proofing. Garlic necklaces, vinegar-soaked sponges, and even consuming copious amounts of alcohol were thought to fend off the disease. The logic: if you're drunk enough, maybe the plague will have a harder time finding you. It was medieval problem-solving at its finest, or perhaps its most desperate. All the while, the social order was teetering on the brink. As scholars observed the shifting sands of power, they noted how the plague was an equal opportunity destroyer. It didn't care for titles or pedigrees. The death of so many clergy members, for example, left the church scrambling to fill its ranks, sometimes with less than ideal candidates. This sudden influx of new, and often inexperienced, clergy led to an erosion of ecclesiastical authority, which in turn led to a questioning of long-held religious doctrines. Not a minor footnote in history, but a seismic shift in the medieval worldview. So, as you and your fellow scholars grapple with the absurdity and tragedy of it all, one thing becomes clear: the world is changing, fast. And while the future is uncertain, one thing is certain: you'll need to adapt, and quickly, if you want to keep pace with the whirlwind of change sweeping across Europe. It's a time when knowledge is not just power, but survival. And as you navigate this new landscape, you can't help but wonder what lies ahead. Will the world learn from this calamity, or are we doomed to repeat the mistakes of the past? Stay tuned, dear scholar, because this story is far from over. So, as you and your fellow scholars grapple with the absurdity and tragedy of it all, one thing becomes clear. The world is changing. Fast. And while the future is uncertain, one thing is certain. You'll need to adapt, and quickly, if you want to keep pace with the whirlwind of change sweeping across Europe. It's a time when knowledge is not just power, but survival. And as you navigate this new landscape, you can't help but wonder what lies ahead. Will the world learn from this calamity, or are we doomed to repeat the mistakes of the past? Stay tuned, dear scholar, because this story is far from over. As the plague tightened its grip, the way scholars communicated and shared ideas had to transform faster than you could say, bubonic. With travel restrictions tighter than a miser's purse strings and fear of contagion turning every handshake into a potential death wish, the humble letter became the intellectual lifeline. These weren't your average wish-you-were-here postcards, but rather intricate exchanges of ideas, questions, and sometimes frantic pleas for help. Enter the era of the wax-sealed letter, the medieval scholar's version of a secure email. Inked with painstaking care, these missives were sealed with wax, a minor deterrent to the plague, perhaps, but a major one to nosy neighbors. The wax seal was the medieval equivalent of a password-protected document, ensuring that only the intended recipient could unfurl its secrets. In a world where the wrong idea could get you branded a heretic faster than you could say, Galileo, such precautions were not just prudent, they were vital. But let's not romanticize it too much. These letters didn't fly across the continent with the speed of an Amazon Prime delivery. Nope, we're talking weeks, sometimes months, for a single exchange. The Postal Service was less a well-oiled machine and more a scrappy network of couriers, dodging metaphorical and literal rats to deliver their cargo. And if you think your inbox is cluttered, imagine waiting 3 months for a reply only to receive a vague, barely legible response. Talk about medieval ghosting. For scholars entrenched in the pursuit of knowledge, manuscripts became the currency of the realm. These weren't just books, they were lifelines, intellectual investments, and occasionally pawns in a bizarre barter system. Rarely did these precious tomes change hands without a little paranoia. Scholars devised cunning methods to protect their treasures. Some employed secret codes, turning their works into cryptic puzzles that would make even Dan Brown scratch his head. Ciphers and hidden messages weren't just the stuff of spy thrillers. They were everyday tools for a scholar trying to keep his manuscript out of the hands of unscrupulous rivals, or worse, the plague-addled masses. But here's where it gets juicy. Misinformation spread through these channels just as fast as the disease itself. The medieval marketplace of ideas was a mixed bag of wisdom and wild speculation. Picture this. One day you're deciphering a treatise on Aristotle, and the next, you're reading about how bathing in urine can ward off the plague. Spoiler alert, it can't. But in times of desperation, logic can take a backseat to lunacy. And let's not forget the belief that the plague was a divine punishment. That theory spread like wildfire, prompting some folks to engage in acts of penance that ranged from the mildly bizarre to the downright dangerous. For every rational explanation, there were a dozen outlandish theories, like the one suggesting that ringing church bells could purify the air. Because nothing says scientific breakthrough like a medieval carillon concert. Or how about the notion that the alignment of the planets was to blame? Yes, Mars and Jupiter were clearly conspiring to ruin everyone's year, a cosmic prank gone awry. As absurd as it sounds now, these beliefs were fiercely debated and defended, sometimes more ardently than the facts themselves. The scholar's role during this time was as much about debunking these myths as it was about preserving knowledge. It was a delicate dance, balancing the dissemination of truth with the need to tread lightly through a minefield of superstition and fear. And all the while, scholars had to keep one eye on the future, wondering if their efforts would be enough to pull humanity back from the brink. In this age of intellectual upheaval, the methods of preserving and sharing knowledge took on a new urgency. Scriptoriums, the medieval version of a copy center, buzzed with activity as monks and scribes worked tirelessly to duplicate manuscripts. Imagine rows of individuals hunched over desks, quills scratching away in candlelit rooms, the air thick with the smell of ink and burning wax. It was a scene of organized chaos, a desperate attempt to safeguard knowledge against the encroaching darkness. But even as they copied and recopied, the risk of error loomed large. Each transcription was a game of scholarly telephone, with the potential for mistakes to creep in and distort the original text. Yet, despite these challenges, the determination to preserve knowledge shone through. This was the medieval equivalent of backing up your hard drive, tedious but absolutely essential. Amidst this chaos, some scholars turned to more inventive methods. Coded messages and hidden notes became the clandestine currency of intellectual exchange. A seemingly innocuous letter could contain layers of meaning accessible only to those with the key to decipher it. It was a game of chess played with words, where the stakes were nothing short of the preservation of human understanding. But let's not forget, all this high-minded shuffling of parchment was occurring against a backdrop of economic upheaval. The cost of maintaining a scriptorium or employing a scribe wasn't pocket change. Manuscripts weren't just cultural artifacts, they were investments, and like any investment, they were subject to the whims of the market, an unpredictable beast at the best of times, and downright feral during a plague. On the bright side, the scarcity of skilled labor meant that scribes and scholars found themselves in demand. The intellectual elite, once tethered to the whims of wealthy patrons, discovered an unexpected silver lining: leverage. The same economic forces that were turning the feudal system on its head were also reshaping the scholarly world. It was a time when knowledge wasn't just power. It was currency, bargaining chip, and lifeline all rolled into one. Yet, as the disease ravaged Europe, the lines between fact and fiction blurred. Superstition mingled with science, creating a cocktail of beliefs as potent as any medieval alchemist's brew. And while some scholars clung to reason, others succumbed to the allure of the fantastical. It was a time when the bizarre rubbed shoulders with the banal, and where, in the face of death, the human imagination soared to both inspiring and absurd heights. In this maelstrom of misinformation, the role of the scholar was as vital as ever. They were the torchbearers of truth, tasked with navigating a landscape littered with half-truths and outright lies. It was a thankless job, but one that carried the weight of future generations on its shoulders. And as they peered into the uncertain future, one question lingered: would humanity emerge from this dark chapter wiser, or simply more cunning in its folly? As the plague continued its relentless march, the scholar's world was forever changed. Communication had become a high-stakes game, with ideas and knowledge as the ultimate prize. It was a time of innovation and desperation, where the boundaries of human ingenuity were pushed to their limits. And through it all, the indomitable spirit of inquiry burned brightly, a beacon of hope in a world overshadowed by despair. So, as you sit there, quill in hand, staring at the flickering candlelight, remember that you are part of a long line of thinkers who dared to question, to challenge, and to believe in the power of knowledge. The world may be unraveling, but as long as there are minds willing to seek the truth, there is hope for a brighter tomorrow. Stay tuned, dear scholar, for this tale is far from over. As you sit there, quill in hand, staring at the flickering candlelight, remember that you are part of a long line of thinkers who dared to question, to challenge, and to believe in the power of knowledge. The world may be unraveling, but as long as there are minds willing to seek the truth, there is hope for a brighter tomorrow. Stay tuned, dear scholar, for this tale is far from over. Now, let's take a deep dive into the medieval mind's coping mechanisms as the plague reached its fever pitch. Picture this: Europe's finest minds, those brainy types who could recite Aristotle backward, suddenly found themselves pondering not just the meaning of life, but the meaning of death, an unwelcome curriculum addition courtesy of the Black Death. When faced with a pandemic that made the Four Horsemen look like a minor inconvenience, some scholars turned to philosophy and theology, seeking solace and answers amidst the chaos. Enter Boethius, the philosopher du jour, with his blockbuster hit, The Consolation of Philosophy. Even if Boethius had been out of print for nearly 800 years by this point, the guy was still making waves. His work, a dialogue between himself and Lady Philosophy, was the medieval equivalent of a TED talk on resilience, offering comfort to those who found themselves questioning the divine logic behind the pandemic. Scholars, amid scribing by candlelight, were grappling with Boethius' existential musings, trying to find some meaning in a world gone mad. It was as if everyone was attending a virtual philosophy symposium, sans the Zoom fatigue. And let's not forget Thomas Aquinas, whose theological works provided a moral compass in these dark times. His Summa Theologica was practically the medieval scholar's Bible, offering a framework for understanding divine justice, or lack thereof, amidst the pestilence. If you were a scholar in 1348, you might have pondered whether the plague was divine retribution or merely a very bad day on God's cosmic calendar. But let's shift gears from existential discourse to existential fashion. The infamous plague doctor masks. You know the look. Long, beak-like masks stuffed with aromatic herbs designed to protect against miasma or bad air. Never has something intended to be so practical been so utterly terrifying. These masks became the quarantine chic of the day, a bizarre blend of practicality and performance art. Imagine stepping into a medieval street only to be greeted by what looked like a parade of avian-themed villains from a Renaissance fair gone rogue. Despite their ominous appearance, these masks were a genuine attempt at protection, albeit misguided. The idea was simple. Stuff the beak with flowers, herbs, and spices to filter out the deadly air. Rosemary, lavender, and myrrh were top picks, turning the inside of these masks into a medieval potpourri. While today's science might scoff at the efficacy of such a defense, it's hard not to appreciate the effort. After all, who wouldn't want to smell like a walking herb garden while facing the apocalypse? Now, let's talk about the literary output of these beleaguered scholars. With their worlds turned upside down, the intellectuals of the day produced works that were a curious mix of pragmatic advice and existential musings. Think of it as a medieval self-help section, complete with grim chapters on survival and more uplifting ones on the human spirit's resilience. These writings reflected not just the era's grim reality, but its glimmers of hope, capturing the complexity of human experience during one of history's darkest chapters. While some scholars penned treatises on the best herbal remedies or the alignment of the stars, others delved into more introspective territory. They questioned the very nature of existence, morality, and the human condition. It was as if the plague had given everyone a crash course in existential philosophy, prompting debates that would echo through the ages. These intellectual endeavors were not just exercises in futility, but acts of defiance against the chaos surrounding them. However, let's not romanticize these scholars as solitary beacons of reason and heroism. The notion of the scholar hero, bravely facing the plague with quill in hand, is as appealing as it is misleading. While there were undoubtedly acts of bravery and brilliance, many scholars were simply trying to survive like everyone else. Some clung to superstition as tightly as they did to their books, while others succumbed to the fear and hysteria gripping the populace. The reality was far messier than the myth. Not every scholar was a paragon of wisdom and virtue. Some were opportunists, exploiting the chaos for personal gain. Others, overwhelmed by the despair, abandoned their scholarly pursuits altogether. It's essential to remember that these scholars were human, with all the flaws and frailties that come with it. They were not immune to the fear and uncertainty that permeated every corner of society. As the plague ravaged Europe, the scholar's world became a microcosm of the broader human experience, one filled with both resilience and resignation. Their writings, debates, and even their choice of attire reflected the complexity of the times, capturing the duality of hope and despair that defined the era. And while the myth of the scholar hero endures, it's crucial to acknowledge the real human experiences behind the legend. So, as you continue to navigate this plague-stricken landscape, take heart in the knowledge that you are not alone in your quest for understanding. The scholars of the past may have faced a world of uncertainty, but they persevered, leaving behind a legacy that continues to inspire. Stay tuned, dear scholar, for the story of humanity's resilience is far from over, and there are still many chapters left to unfold. As we wave goodbye to the myth of the scholar hero and dive headfirst into the aftermath of the plague, let's talk about the long game, the legacy that followed this medieval mayhem. Much like a phoenix rising from the ashes, medieval scholarship emerged battered, but intriguingly not broken. It was the intellectual equivalent of a world tour comeback album, and the hits just kept coming. Let's hit rewind and see how the plague, that all agent of chaos, set the stage for one of history's greatest comebacks, the Renaissance. In the wake of the Black Death, the world of academia wasn't just licking its wounds, it was reimagining itself. As Europe staggered out of the darkness, the demand for education soared, and universities, those bastions of medieval knowledge, began to rebuild. Think of it as a medieval version of Extreme Makeover, academic edition. By the mid-15th century, institutions like the University of Paris and Oxford were not just back on their feet, but strutting down the intellectual runway. Enrollment numbers climbed faster than a monk up a bell tower, with new students flocking to lectures on everything from theology to the emerging field of natural sciences. Speaking of sciences, let's not forget the monumental shifts in medical understanding that occurred during and after the plague. The pestilence forced scholars to question traditional medical practices and seek out new methods. The Black Death was like that relentless personal trainer who just won't stop yelling. Sure, it was painful, but it got results. The Plague-era push for medical advancements laid the groundwork for figures like Andreas Vesalius, whose 1543 work, De Humani Corporis Fabrica, revolutionized the study of human anatomy. And we can't forget good old Paracelsus, who ditched the medieval reliance on Galen's teachings faster than you can say alchemy, paving the way for modern pharmacology. But let's not get too carried away on the wings of progress without acknowledging the economic context that played a pivotal role in this rebirth. The labor shortages caused by the plague had turned the feudal system on its head, and the survivors, serfs and scholars alike, found themselves in a position to demand better conditions and wages. This shift in power dynamics meant that more people had the means and the motivation to pursue education, fueling a thirst for knowledge that would become the hallmark of the Renaissance. The scholars who rose from the ashes of the Black Death were a new breed, resilient, resourceful, and ready to challenge the status quo. They were like intellectual adrenaline junkies, diving headfirst into the uncharted waters of humanism, a movement that would redefine how people viewed themselves and the world around them. It was a heady mix of Greek and Roman revival, a celebration of the human spirit, and an emphasis on empirical evidence. This was less about dusty old tomes and more about the power of observation, experimentation, and critical thinking. It was the dawn of an era that would see giants like Leonardo da Vinci and Galileo Galilei challenging the heavens and the earth with their groundbreaking discoveries. Now, before we start patting ourselves too hard on the back for all this progress, let's remember that the Renaissance wasn't all sunshine and roses. The rebirth of classical learning came with its own set of challenges, not least of which was the tension between the old and new ways of thinking. Academic institutions became battlegrounds where traditionalists and innovators clashed over the very nature of knowledge itself. It was like an intellectual version of reality TV, with rival factions vying for supremacy, not with roses, but with rhetoric and reason. And here's where we pivot to the grand finale, the what if that should be keeping you up at night. Imagine, if you will, a world where medieval scholars hadn't survived the plague to pass on their wisdom. Picture your morning coffee without the scientific revolution, your smartphone without the mathematical advances, or your favorite novel without the literary blossoming of the Renaissance. It's a chilling thought, isn't it? The truth is, those scrappy, determined scholars were the unsung heroes who bridged the gap between the medieval and the modern. Their endurance and adaptability in the face of catastrophe shaped the world as we know it today. As we wrap up this whirlwind tour through history, let's take a moment to reflect on what modern times can learn from these tenacious thinkers. The Black Death was a lesson in human resilience, a stark reminder that adversity can be a catalyst for change. In today's world, where challenges come in the form of pandemics, climate change, and political upheaval, we can draw inspiration from the medieval scholars who faced their own existential crisis and emerged stronger for it. Their legacy is a testament to the power of curiosity, the importance of questioning the status quo, and the undeniable impact of education on society. So, as you settle in for the night, quill, or perhaps keyboard, in hand, remember that you too are part of this long tradition of seekers and thinkers. In a world that often feels as unpredictable as a medieval marketplace, take heart in the knowledge that the spirit of inquiry and the quest for understanding are timeless. And who knows, maybe one day, centuries from now, someone will be looking back at us, marveling at how we, like the scholars of the past, rose to the challenges of our time. Stay curious, my friend, for the story of human ingenuity is far from over, and there's always a new chapter waiting to be written. You're jolted awake by the first rays of sunlight sneaking through the thin fabric of your window coverings. No blackout curtains here, just good old-fashioned linen doing its best to keep out the Athenian dawn. Welcome to your day as a merchant in ancient Greece, where morning means business, literally. As you shake off the last remnants of sleep, your ears perk up to the cacophony rising from the Agora, Athens' commercial heart and soul. This is where you'll be heading, and trust me, it's a place that makes your local supermarket on a Saturday look like a meditative retreat. The Agora is not just a market, it's the social media of its day, a buzzing hub of news, gossip, and the occasional philosophical debate. As you step outside, the streets are already alive with the clamor of traders setting up their stalls. Wooden booths line the square, each offering a smorgasbord of goods from olives to ornate pottery. You can almost taste the salt in the air as fishmongers haul in the fresh catch from Piraeus, Athens' bustling port just a short journey away. This is the epicenter of trade, and you're smack dab in the middle of it. Now, let's talk money, specifically the drachma. A single drachma is roughly equivalent to a skilled worker's daily wage. But for you, it's the lifeblood of your business. You're not dealing in abstract numbers here. Every coin is a tangible connection to your livelihood. The coins themselves are small, silver, and stamped with the owl of Athena, the city's patron goddess. They're as much a part of the city's identity as the Parthenon looming on the Acropolis. And yes, you have to carry these little metal discs around, because the ancient Greeks were not big on credit cards. Go figure. As you weave through the crowd, you're acutely aware of the social tapestry that makes up the Agora. On one hand, you've got your Athenian citizen merchants, busy with their artisanal goods and olive oil jars. They're the ones with the voting rights and the political clout. On the other hand, there are the medics, foreigners who have made Athens their home. They're the unsung heroes of the city's economy, handling the dirty work that keeps the place running. But let's not romanticize their role. These guys pay a hefty tax for the privilege of living here and aren't allowed to own land. It's the kind of setup that makes the term second-class citizen feel like an upgrade. If you think the life of a merchant is all hustle and haggling, you're not wrong, but there's a bit more to it. You're not just trading goods, you're trading stories, ideas, and news. You catch snippets of conversation, word of a new philosophical treatise making the rounds, the latest political maneuvering in the assembly, or the outcome of last night's epic poetry contest. And of course, the occasional scandalous tidbit that would make even the most seasoned tabloid journalist blush. So why does all this matter? Well, trade is the lifeblood of Athens, the veritable engine driving its economy. The money you make today doesn't just line your pockets. It fuels everything from public works to military campaigns. Without trade, there's no fleet of triremes defending Greek waters, no lavish festivals celebrating the gods, and definitely no grandiose building projects like the Parthenon. It's a chain reaction that starts right here in the Agora, with you and your fellow merchants. But hold on. Before you get too swept up in the romance of it all, let's drop a truth bomb. Being a merchant isn't all sunshine and olive oil. It's hard graft, with long hours and the constant pressure to outdo your competitors. Add in the ever-present risk of theft or market fluctuations, and you've got yourself a cocktail of stress that even Dionysus would struggle to drink. Yet, amid the chaos, there's a palpable sense of community, a shared understanding that everyone here plays a part in the grand Athenian drama. As the morning sun climbs higher, you feel the heat beginning to settle in. Time to dive headfirst into the day's dealings. You've got goods to sell, stories to swap, and maybe, just maybe, fortunes to be made. Welcome to the life of an ancient Greek merchant. It's a wild ride, full of highs, lows, and more than a few surprises along the way. Time to leave the bustling Agora behind and shift your focus to another hive of activity, the port of Piraeus. This is where the real magic, or some might say madness, of trade happens. Picture a place where the smell of the sea blends with the scent of sweat and ambition. Piraeus is Athens' gateway to the world, a crucial cog in the ancient economic machine. And like any good machine, it's both marvelously efficient and gloriously chaotic. Navigating Piraeus is like trying to find your way through a labyrinth designed by a particularly mischievous minotaur. The port is a sprawling mess of ships, sailors, and shouting. Hundreds of vessels barb in the water, their sails fluttering like impatient flags. You've got everything from sleek triremes to hefty cargo ships, each one loaded down with goods that could make or break a merchant's fortune. But here's the kicker. It's not just about loading and unloading. It's a delicate ballet of logistics, and if you miss a step, you might as well kiss your drachmas goodbye. Thanks to geography, Athens has a prime spot on the Mediterranean dance floor. Maritime routes are the veins and arteries of ancient trade, pumping life into economies across the region. But don't get too starry-eyed. Those routes aren't exactly a cruise vacation. Sure, they promise exotic goods and wealth, but they also bring storms, pirates, and the occasional shipwreck. Sailing the Mediterranean is a gamble where the house often wins. You've got to be part sailor, part gambler, and part weatherman to pull off these voyages. Now, let's talk about the unsung hero of ancient trade, insurance. Yes, even in these times, risk management wasn't just for the cautious or the paranoid. Merchants took out loans, secured by the cargo itself. If your ship made it back safely, congratulations. You pay back the loan plus interest. If not, well, you're off the hook financially, but your reputation might sink faster than your ship. This proto-insurance system was a double-edged sword, a testament to human ingenuity and our eternal optimism. Or is it naivete? That things will work out in the end. And let's not ignore the myth versus reality showdown. You've all heard tales of daring merchants braving the high seas for glory and gold. But let's be real. For every successful voyage, there are countless tales of misfortune. Imagine navigating without GPS, relying instead on the stars and sheer intuition. A sudden storm could send you off course, while pirates were more than just a Hollywood trope. They were a genuine threat, an ancient version of a hostile takeover. But why does all this matter? Because trade is the lifeblood of civilization, the invisible thread connecting cultures and economies. It's the reason you can sip on Egyptian wine while wearing silk from the East. Trade shapes empires and topples them, and understanding its complexities is like holding a key to history itself. So, as you stand on the edge of Piraeus, watching the ships come and go, remember this. You're part of an intricate web of commerce that stretches across the known world. Every item traded is a story of risk, reward, and relentless human ambition. It's a wild ride, and you're smack in the middle of it, steering your course through the unpredictable waters of ancient Greek commerce. Ready to dive deeper? Just wait until you see what happens next. But just as you're soaking in the salty sea breeze, it's time to pivot from the chaos of the port to the equally turbulent waters of politics. Welcome, my friend, to the midday melee where trade and diplomacy collide. You see, in ancient Greece, commerce wasn't just about haggling over amphorae. It was a high-stakes game of political chess, where city-states like Athens, Sparta, and Corinth maneuvered for power, much like modern corporations jostle for market share today. Let's dive into the nitty-gritty of how city-state politics shaped your life as a merchant. You're not just dealing with goods. You're navigating a labyrinth of treaties, alliances, and yes, the occasional backstab. Athens, for instance, wasn't just any city-state. It was the bay and say of the ancient world, with its powerful Delian League acting like an exclusive club for allies. Want to trade in the Aegean? Better be on Athens' good side, or you might find yourself left adrift, literally. Take the infamous Peace of Nissus, signed in 421 BCE. It was like the ancient equivalent of a shaky ceasefire, halting the Peloponnesian War between Athens and Sparta for a grand total of 6 years. Sure, it promised peace, but it was a piece of work in itself, a patchy truce that left many city-states confused and merchants like you wondering where to place your bets. Would the peace hold, or was it just another lull before the storm? Spoiler alert, it didn't last. But for a brief shining moment, you could trade without worrying about your goods getting caught in a crossfire. Now, let's bust a myth. The romantic idea of the independent merchant, free as a bird, flitting from port to port with nary a care in the world. In reality, you were more like a tightrope walker, balancing precariously between economic interests and political pressures. Ever heard of the Megarian Decree? Athens imposed this economic sanction on Megara, banning its merchants from Athenian markets. This wasn't just a slap on the wrist. It was a full-on economic chokehold, showing that one city's political tiff could become your commercial nightmare. But it wasn't all doom and gloom. Shrewd merchants knew how to play the game, leveraging alliances to their advantage. Aligning with the right city-state could open doors to new markets. Imagine you're dealing in timber, a heart commodity for shipbuilding. An alliance with Athens might get you access to the lush forests of Macedonia, across the wrong city, and you're stuck with a warehouse full of unsold planks, wondering where it all went wrong. Tariffs and regulations were the spices in this political stew, adding flavor, or more often, indigestion, to your trading adventures. Each city-state had its own set of rules, a bureaucratic obstacle course that would make even the most patient merchant tear their hair out. Want a dock in Corinth? Be prepared to fork over a hefty tariff. This wasn't just a minor inconvenience. It could make or break your profit margins. And don't even get me started on the Byzantine complexity of import-export regulations. Yet the allure of trade was irresistible. It was the ancient version of the gold rush, pulling in merchants eager to make their fortune, despite the political minefield. And let's face it, who could resist the siren call of exotic goods from far-off lands? The allure of Phoenician purple dye, Egyptian papyrus, or Babylonian textiles was enough to make you dance to the tune of whichever city-state held the strings. So why does all this matter? Because understanding the political environment is like getting a backstage pass to the concert of ancient commerce. It's the context that turns a simple exchange of goods into a story of strategy and survival. It's a world where the personal is political, and every transaction is a gamble with the guards of diplomacy. As you navigate these treacherous waters, remember this: trade was never just about goods. It was a dance of diplomacy, a chessboard of choices where every move had consequences. And in this ancient game, you're not just a player, you're a strategist, plotting your next move in a world where politics and commerce are inseparable. Ready to keep playing. The stakes are high, but so is the thrill. Let's see what the afternoon brings in this ever-unfolding drama of ancient Greek trade. And just like that, the sun reaches its zenith, casting a spotlight on the bustling streets of Athens. Afternoon in this ancient metropolis isn't just a time to siesta. It's the crescendo of the day, where merchants like you are locked in a high-stakes competition worthy of any Olympic sport. So, how do you stand out in this crowded agora? Welcome to the art of innovation and reputation, ancient Greek style. In a market where everyone and their uncle is peddling amphorae, you need a hook, something that sets you apart from the pack. Enter innovation, the not-so-secret sauce that turns a run-of-the-mill trader into the talk of the town. Take, for example, the clever merchant who first decided to flavor olive oil with herbs, creating an early version of what we'd call gourmet. This kind of ingenuity didn't just attract customers. It built a brand before branding was even a thing. But innovation isn't just about the product. It's about the pitch. Imagine hawking your wares with the eloquence of a seasoned orator, weaving tales of heroic voyages or mystical lands. Sure, some might call it embellishment, but a little drama never hurt a drachma. After all, the ancient Greeks were nothing if not storytellers, and a good yarn can turn a simple spice into the stuff of legend. Of course, standing out also means keeping an eye on the competition. In a city teeming with traders, the agora is a battlefield where wit and wisdom clash. Merchants form guilds, those ancient fraternities where you might share resources, or, let's be honest, gossip, about market trends and innovations. Think of these guilds as the precursor to trade associations, offering a semblance of order in a chaotic commercial world. Now, let's talk partnerships. It's not just about going it alone. Sometimes, two heads are better than one, especially when you're facing the ever-present specter of piracy. Yes, piracy, an ancient nuisance that's less about parrots and peg legs, more about lost profits and perilous seas. Forming partnerships wasn't just strategic. It was survival. A collective of merchants pooling their resources could hire private security to ward off these marauders, creating a makeshift navy of sorts. It's the ancient version of hiring muscle, only with more triremes and fewer leather jackets. But why stop at security? Partnerships can also mean diversification. By joining forces, you could tap into new markets, spreading your risk while expanding your reach. Imagine pairing your olive oil business with a partner dealing in fine wines. Suddenly, you're not just a vendor. You're a one-stop shop for the culinary connoisseur, offering a taste of the Mediterranean in a single transaction. Now, let's debunk a myth, the idea of the static ancient economy, frozen in time like an exhibit in a museum. The truth: Greek merchants were as adaptable as any modern entrepreneur. They had to be. Consumer demands were as fickle then as they are now. A sudden war could shift the demand from luxury goods to practical supplies, forcing merchants to pivot faster than a seasoned dancer at a Dionysian festival. Economic adaptability was key. When the market for pottery dipped, some clever traders transitioned to textiles, capitalizing on the latest fashion trends from the East. Others invested in the burgeoning silver mines of Laurium, turning raw materials into minted coins that carried Athena's owl and their fortunes across the seas. Flexibility wasn't just a skill, it was a necessity, a testament to the resilience of human ambition. And let's not forget the role of reputation. In a world without Yelp reviews, your standing in the community was everything. A good reputation meant trust, and trust meant business. Word of mouth was the lifeblood of commerce, and a single bad deal could tarnish your name faster than you could say Homeric epic. The stakes, high, the rewards, even higher. In this world of ancient commerce, every day was a new chapter, a fresh opportunity to make your mark. As afternoon gives way to evening, the agora starts to settle, but the wheels of trade never stop turning. Merchants regroup, assess their day's work, and plot their next move in the ever-evolving dance of supply and demand. So, as you navigate the crowded marketplace, remember this. Innovation and reputation are your allies, partnerships your shield, and adaptability your sword. The world of ancient Greek commerce is as dynamic as it is demanding, a testament to the enduring spirit of human enterprise. And just like that, the sun dips lower, casting long shadows over the agora, signaling the end of one day's hustle and the promise of another. Ready to see what the evening brings? Stay tuned, because the story of ancient trade is far from over. As the sun dips below the horizon, painting the sky with strokes of amber and pink, the agora slowly empties out. Merchants like you begin to pack up their stalls, taking stock of the day's triumphs and tribulations. The air, still warm from the day's hustle, carries a sense of satisfaction mingled with exhaustion. You're not just closing shop, you're closing a chapter in a story that's as old as civilization itself. The markets may have quieted, but the impact of your work resonates far beyond the boundaries of commerce. Trade in ancient Greece was a catalyst for cultural exchange, a conduit through which ideas flowed as freely as goods. Picture this. Every amphora you sold, every bolt of cloth that changed hands, was a piece of a much larger puzzle, a mosaic of human interaction that crossed borders and bridged cultures. Consider the spread of the Phoenician alphabet, which revolutionized communication throughout the Mediterranean. Merchants like you played a pivotal role in this linguistic leap forward. As you traveled from port to port, your transactions weren't just economic, they were educational. The alphabet, simple yet profound, was shared and adapted, becoming a cornerstone of literacy that supported everything from personal correspondence to epic poetry. But let's not get too starry-eyed about the life of a merchant. The reality is a mix of grit and glamour, hard work and high stakes. Unpredictable weather, volatile markets, and the constant dance with political tensions made each day a new challenge. It's a far cry from the romanticized image of leisurely traders, sipping wine as their ships glide effortlessly into harbor. The truth, you're more likely to be found haggling over a batch of olives than lounging in luxury. And yet, the allure of trade endures. Rewards are tangible, not just in drachmas, but in the rich tapestry of experiences and connections you weave through your work. You're part of a dynamic network, a living web of commerce and culture that spans continents. Every deal struck is a thread in this grand tapestry, tying together disparate peoples and places in a shared pursuit of prosperity. Now, let's bust another myth. The idea that ancient trade was a straightforward affair, free of modern complexities. In reality, it was a labyrinth of logistics, a chessboard where every move required foresight and strategy. Take the role of currency exchange, for instance. Each city-state had its own coinage, meaning a savvy merchant had to master not just one, but multiple monetary systems. You might start the day with a pocketful of Athenian drachmas and end it with a handful of Corinthian arbals, each coin a testament to your adaptability and acumen. Trade routes themselves were as intricate as any modern supply chain. The Mediterranean Sea, with its countless ports and perilous waters, was the motorway of the ancient world. But without GPS or reliable maps, navigation was an art form all its own. Skilled sailors were worth their weight in gold, guiding ships through treacherous waters with nothing but the stars and their own seasoned instincts. Yet, for all its challenges, the merchant life offered unparalleled opportunities for those willing to take the plunge. You weren't just a trader, You were an explorer, an ambassador, a conduit of change. Each voyage expanded your horizons, both literal and metaphorical, introducing you to new cultures and customs. Through trade, you became a silent architect of the ancient world, building bridges between civilizations with every cargo unloaded. The social ripple effects of your work were profound. As goods flowed through the agora, so too did ideas. Philosophies were exchanged alongside spices, political theories debated over textiles. The marketplace was a melting pot of intellect and innovation, where thinkers and traders rubbed shoulders, sparking the intellectual fires that would fuel the Western world for centuries to come. In the grand tapestry of history, the legacy of ancient Greek merchants is woven with threads of resilience, resourcefulness, and relentless ambition. The challenges they faced were immense, but so too were the rewards. They were the unsung heroes of an age defined by exploration and expansion, their contributions echoing through time like the chime of coins in a bustling market. As you stroll homeward, the agora behind you and the future ahead reflect on the enduring impact of your day's work. You're not just a merchant, you're a pioneer, a purveyor of progress in a world constantly on the brink of change. Through every deal and every journey, you contribute to a legacy that transcends time, a testament to the indomitable spirit of human endeavor. So here's to you, the ancient Greek merchant, navigating a world as complex and challenging as any we know today. You've faced the storms, dodged the pirates, and danced with politics, all in pursuit of a better tomorrow. And as the stars take their place in the night sky, remember, yours is a story of resilience, of innovation, and of an unyielding quest for connection in an ever-expanding world. In the murky depths of the 12th century, as if someone decided the medieval skyline needed a little more pizzazz, the first Gothic cathedrals began to rise in France. These stone giants weren't just any old buildings. They were the medieval equivalent of announcing your power and piety in the loudest voice possible, without the aid of a microphone. Back then, if you wanted to flaunt your wealth and religious devotion, you didn't just build a house of worship. You built a monument that could be seen from miles away, casting shadows long enough to keep even the most ambitious of kings and bishops in endless competition, each vying to outdo the next in height and splendor. Now, let's set the stage. The Gothic style was born in a time when Europe was shaking off the dust of the Dark Ages and stepping into the light, quite literally. The 12th century was a period of relative peace and prosperity in France, a respite from constant invasions and internal strife. The Capetian kings were solidifying their control, and the church was flexing its spiritual and temporal muscles, an era ripe for architectural innovation. Enter the Gothic cathedral, the medieval skyscraper, where stone met sky in a daring game of Jenga. The birthplace of this architectural revolution, the Isle-de-France region, with the Basilica of Saint Denis leading the charge around the year 1135. This wasn't just any basilica. It was the pet project of one Abbot Suger, a man with enough ambition to put any modern-day CEO to shame. Suger envisioned a church as a heavenly Jerusalem, a place where the divine light of God could pour in through stained glass windows like some celestial spotlight. And so, the first rib vaults and pointed arches took shape, giving birth to the Gothic style, a term later coined by Renaissance critics who thought these medieval designs were as barbaric as the Goths who sacked Rome. Spoiler alert, it wasn't a compliment. But why the obsession with height and light? Well, in a time when the average peasant was lucky to see past the walls of his village, the cathedral was a beacon of hope and authority. The taller the cathedral, the closer it was to heaven, or at least that's what they wanted you to think. Kings and bishops, in their quest to outshine one another, poured their fortunes into these architectural marvels, each trying to build the tallest and most elaborate structure. It was a time of one-upmanship on a grand scale. A medieval version of my cathedral is bigger than yours. Let's not forget the socio-political backdrop here. The church was the epicenter of medieval life, wielding more influence than a modern-day social media influencer. And just like influencers, they needed to maintain their status. Building a grand cathedral was a way to show off their power and attract pilgrims, which translated into wealth, a clever mix of faith and finance, if you will. The economic stakes were high, and the projects were not cheap. The Cathedral of Chartres, for instance, began its reconstruction in 1194 and took over 60 years to complete. Imagine getting that bill in the mail. But how did they actually pull off these feats of engineering without cranes, bulldozers, or even YouTube tutorials on stone masonry? The secret lay in innovative techniques like flying buttresses, which allowed walls to be thinner and taller by transferring the weight of the roof outwards and downwards. These weren't just practical. They were a chance for elaborate decoration, a win-win for the architects looking to impress their patrons. And while we're on the topic of impressing patrons, let's not overlook the role of machismo. This was an era when masculinity was often measured by the size of one's cathedral. The higher the spire, the greater the glory. It was an ecclesiastical arms race where bishops and kings were willing to throw bags of gold at the feet of master builders to claim the tallest, grandest house of God. In fact, by the end of the 13th century, race was on to see who could build the first cathedral taller than 100 meters. Spoiler, Beauvais Cathedral was the ambitious winner, but its vaults collapsed shortly after completion. Perhaps a case of too much enthusiasm, not enough structural support. The Gothic cathedral was more than just a place of worship. It was a statement, a towering testament to religious devotion, political power, and the audacity of human ambition. These structures were the medieval internet, broadcasting messages of authority and faith across the land. They weren't just buildings. They were the ultimate status symbol of the Middle Ages, a time when stone and glass spoke louder than words. So, as the 12th century drew to a close, the skyline of France was forever changed. Cathedrals, with their skeletal structures reaching skyward, darted the landscape like stone giants. They were the fruits of an era defined by the interplay of faith, power, and prestige, where the divine and the earthly were intertwined in a dance of light and shadow. And while they may not have had blueprints or advanced engineering degrees, the medieval builders left a legacy that still inspires awe and wonder today. The Gothic cathedral wasn't just a building. It was a symbol of a world striving to touch the heavens, one stone at a time. While these medieval builders might have lacked the digital convenience of auto CAD, they certainly didn't lack ingenuity. Enter the flying buttress and ribbed vault, architectural innovations as transformative as any tech startup today. These marvels were the medieval equivalent of adding hydraulics to your lowrider, functional but with a touch of flair. Let's dive into the nitty-gritty of these engineering masterpieces and the folks who dared to dream them up. First up, the flying buttress. Sounds majestic, right? And it was, in its own stony kind of way. Imagine a support structure that's more akin to an architectural exoskeleton than a wall. It's all about holding things up without getting in the way of those glorious, heavenward stained glass windows. You see, medieval architects had a problem. How do you build taller, lighter, and more open structures without the whole thing coming down in a heap of rubble? The solution was to literally take the pressure off by transferring the force of gravity away from the walls and into the ground. The flying buttress did just that, redistributing the load through a series of arches and piers, allowing the walls to stretch up and out like a gymnast mid-routine. Now, you might wonder, who had the audacity to try this architectural high-wire act? Enter Abbot Suger of St. Denis, an early adopter of the Gothic style and the original influencer of ecclesiastical architecture. Suger wasn't just content with building a basilica. He wanted a celestial stage that could rival heaven itself. And so, in the 1130, he oversaw the construction of the ribbed vaults and pointed arches that would become hallmarks of Gothic design. These innovations were like giving the cathedral a spinal column, providing skeletal support, and allowing the roof to soar above like the wings of an angel. Suger, with his oversized ambition, wasn't just thinking about aesthetics. He was also about that medieval ROI. The more impressive the cathedral, the more pilgrims it would attract, and with them, of course, more donations. It was a divine investment strategy, turning architectural grandeur into cold, hard cash. And it worked. The Basilica of St. Denis became a prototype, inspiring a generation of architects to reach for the sky, literally and figuratively. But let's not get carried away with the romance of it all. Building these architectural behemoths was no small feat, and it certainly wasn't all smooth sailing. Medieval builders faced the kind of challenges that would make modern contractors weep. They had no pneumatic drills or cranes. They relied on manpower, pulleys, and sheer stubbornness. It was like trying to solve a Rubik's Cube with a blindfold on and one hand tied behind your back. Take the case of Beauvais Cathedral, the ambitious overachiever of its time. Its vaults reached a staggering height of 48 meters, making it the tallest structure of its kind. But oh, the hubris. Just a few years after completion, in 1284, the vaults came crashing down. It was a classic case of overreach, like a medieval Icarus flying too close to the sun. The lesson here: gravity doesn't play favorites, not even with the pious. These oops moments weren't just minor setbacks. They were catastrophic failures that could bankrupt a bishop's coffers. The economics of cathedral building were daunting. Consider this. The construction of Chartres Cathedral alone required the equivalent of thousands of laborers' annual wages. It was a risky business, with each stone laid carrying the weight of both financial ruin and ecclesiastical glory. And yet, the allure of the Gothic cathedral persisted, a testament to human ambition and the desire to touch the divine. These structures were more than just religious centers. They were community hubs, places where the sacred and the secular intertwined. In a world where most people lived in wooden shacks, the cathedral was a marvel, a stone oasis in a sea of thatch. It was a place where the ordinary could feel extraordinary, if only for a Sunday. So, as these medieval architects continued their quest to defy gravity, they left us with a legacy that still inspires awe. The Gothic cathedral was a masterclass in balancing beauty and practicality, a reminder of both human ingenuity and folly. They were the skyscrapers of their day, pushing the boundaries of what was possible with little more than stone, mortar, and a whole lot of faith. As we move forward, we'll explore more of these engineering feats and the stories behind them. Because if the history of the Gothic cathedral teaches us anything, it's that sometimes the greatest achievements come from those willing to take a leap of faith, even when the ground isn't quite ready to catch them. Yet, as these medieval dreamers were busy redefining the skyline with their celestial ambitions, let's pivot to the unsung heroes who actually turned these lofty visions into towering realities: the workers. Spoiler alert, it wasn't all hymns and halos. Building a Gothic cathedral was more than slapping some stones together and hoping for a miracle. It was a gargantuan task, requiring a small army of stonemasons, carpenters, glassmakers, and laborers who might have been more familiar with sore backs and blisters than with divine inspiration. Let's start with the stonemasons, the rock stars of the medieval construction scene, pun entirely intended. These were the folks who could take a hunk of limestone and, through a combination of skill, sweat, and probably a fair amount of swearing, carve it into a piece of architectural art. They were the ones who gave those iconic flying buttresses and pointed arches their signature flair. But don't be fooled by the romantic image of the lone mason chiseling away in quiet contemplation. This was no solo gig. In fact, a single cathedral could employ up to 1,000 workers at the height of construction. We're talking a medieval construction site buzzing with activity, more akin to a bustling ant colony than a serene monastery. And what about the carpenters? These guys were the backbone, quite literally, of the Gothic cathedral. They were responsible for the wooden frames that supported those soaring vaults during construction, a job that required precision and an eye for geometry that would make a modern-day engineer nod in respect. But let's not sugarcoat it. This was backbreaking work, often carried out in less than ideal conditions. Picture the roof of Chartres Cathedral, which required over 500 oak trees to build. That's a lot of lumber, folks. And considering that every beam had to be cut by hand, it's safe to say that medieval carpenters didn't need gym memberships to stay in shape. Then there were the glassmakers, tasked with creating the stunning stained glass windows that transformed sunlight into kaleidoscopic displays of divine light. These windows weren't just decorative. They were a medieval PowerPoint presentation, depicting biblical stories and saints to an audience that, for the most part, couldn't read. Creating these masterpieces was a meticulous process, involving coloring glass with metal oxides and assembling pieces like a giant jigsaw puzzle. And if you think your last craft project was stressful, imagine the pressure of knowing that a single slip could shatter months of work into 1,000,000 tiny pieces. So, what about the economic side of this architectural extravaganza? Well, building a cathedral was less like a weekend DIY project and more like a centuries-long investment. The construction of Notre Dame de Paris, for instance, began in 1163 and wasn't completed until 1345. That's nearly 200 years of continuous building, a timeline that makes modern construction delays look positively punctual. Financing such an endeavor required a steady stream of funds, often sourced from a combination of tithes, donations, and the occasional indulgence sale, because nothing says support the arts like buying a little less time in purgatory. The laborers themselves, despite their crucial role, didn't exactly live in luxury. Most were paid in kind, think food, clothing, and basic shelter, rather than cash. It was a tough gig, with long hours and the ever-present risk of injury. Yet, for many, it was a chance to be part of something bigger than themselves, a way to contribute to a legacy that would outlast them by centuries. And while we might like to imagine these medieval builders as a harmonious brotherhood, the reality was probably closer to a modern-day office, complete with its own share of disputes, rivalries, and the occasional grumble about management. Speaking of management, let's not forget the master builders, the project managers of their day. These were the individuals who oversaw the entire construction process, ensuring that every stone was laid according to plan and that the budget didn't spiral out of control. They were the ones who had to balance the demands of their patrons, often powerful bishops or wealthy nobility, with the realities of medieval engineering. It was a high-pressure role, one that required both technical know-how and political savvy. After all, if things went south, it wasn't just the cathedral at stake. Their careers and reputations were on the line. Despite the challenges, the allure of building a Gothic cathedral was undeniable. It was a chance to create something timeless, a monument that would inspire awe in generations to come. And while the journey was fraught with obstacles, the end result was nothing short of miraculous. These cathedrals were more than just places of worship. They were community landmarks, symbols of civic pride that anchored towns and cities across Europe. As we continue our exploration of these architectural wonders, we'll delve deeper into the stories of those who dedicated their lives to transforming stone and glass into symbols of faith and human achievement. Because if the history of the Gothic cathedral teaches us anything, it's that the pursuit of greatness is a journey filled with both triumph and toil. A reminder that even the most divine dreams are built on a foundation of hard work and perseverance. But let's not get carried away with the grandiosity of stone and glass without considering the real-world impact these cathedrals had on medieval society. It's time to shift our focus from the sky-high spires to the bustling life on the ground. Picture a medieval town, perhaps not much more than a sleepy village before the cathedral's foundation stone was laid. Suddenly, it's a hive of activity, a medieval Manhattan, albeit with fewer skyscrapers and more sheep. These architectural behemoths didn't just spring up overnight, nor did they exist in a vacuum. They were magnets for people, drawing in pilgrims, traders, and craftsmen like moths to a flame, or perhaps like medieval folk to a festival. And boy, did they bring the party. Pilgrimages were the medieval answer to a road trip, except instead of a beach, you ended up at a cathedral, seeking redemption or maybe just a really good relic. Let's talk numbers. Take Canterbury Cathedral in England, for example. By the end of the 12th century, it was attracting thousands of pilgrims annually, turning the city into a bustling epicenter of commerce and devotion. These weren't just spiritual tourists. They were economic lifelines, spending money on everything from food and lodging to souvenirs. Because who doesn't want to bring home a piece of the divine, or at least a tacky trinket claiming to be? The economic ripple effect was staggering. Local businesses flourished, from inns and taverns to blacksmiths and bakers. If economic booms today are measured by stock market indices, back then it was all about how many pilgrims were fighting for bed space. Now, while we're on the subject of fighting for space, let's talk traffic. Ever thought medieval times were a serene escape from the clogged streets of modern cities? Think again. Influx of people inevitably led to what we could cheekily call medieval traffic jams. Picture narrow cobblestone streets packed with carts, livestock, and throngs of pilgrims, all trying to get a front row seat at the latest miracle sighting. It was a cacophony of clattering wheels, bleeding sheep, and the occasional loud haggler. And you thought rush hour on the freeway was bad. But the cathedrals weren't just spiritual drive-thrus. They were the original community centers. These towering structures were the backdrop for daily life, hosting markets, festivals, and even legal trials. Imagine getting your weekly groceries while a bishop presides over a court case nearby. It was the ultimate multitasking venue. The cathedral square was a stage where the sacred met the secular, a place where faith and commerce intermingled in a colorful tapestry of medieval life. And let's not forget the cultural impact. These cathedrals were more than just stone and glass. They were beacons of art and knowledge. They housed libraries, schools, and scriptoriums, becoming fonts of learning in a world where books were as rare as a snowstorm in July. The Cathedral School of Notre Dame in Paris, for example, was a precursor to the University of Paris, attracting scholars from all over Europe. Talk about prestige. Your little cathedral school could eventually rival the Ivy Leagues of today, minus the exorbitant tuition fees and student loans. Art, too, flourished in the shadow of these cathedrals. Stained glass windows weren't just for show. They were the medieval equivalent of Instagram, broadcasting stories of saints and sinners in vibrant color. Imagine being a craftsman tasked with creating a window that not only had to withstand the elements, but also deliver a theological lecture to the illiterate masses. No pressure there, but let's peel back the romantic veneer for a moment. While these cathedrals were magnificent cultural hubs, they were also monuments to the power dynamics of the time. The church wielded enormous influence, often eclipsing even the local nobility. Building a cathedral was as much about flexing ecclesiastical muscle as it was about glorifying God. The bigger and more elaborate the cathedral, the more it signaled the church's dominance, an ever-present reminder of where authority truly lay. And let's face it, nothing says power like a building that casts a shadow longer than a medieval tax ledger. Yet, for the people living in the cathedral's shadow, these structures were a mixed blessing. Sure, they brought prosperity and a sense of pride, but they also symbolized the stark inequalities of the time. While bishops and nobility commissioned these grand projects, the common folk bore the brunt of the financial burden through taxes and tithes. It was a delicate balancing act, supporting the church's ambitions while ensuring the local economy didn't crumble under the weight of its own expectations. In the end, Gothic cathedrals were more than just architectural wonders. They were the beating hearts of medieval society. They were places where faith met commerce, where the divine brushed shoulders with the mundane. They were the centers of gravity around which entire towns revolved. And while the spires soared heavenward, the real magic happened at street level, where human ambition and creativity thrived amidst the clamor of everyday life. As we continue our journey through the history of these monumental edifices, let's keep our eyes peeled for the stories yet untold, the tales of those who lived, worked, and worshipped in the shadows of these giants. Because if the history of the Gothic cathedral teaches us anything, it's that behind every stone lies a story waiting to be uncovered. And who knows, we might just find that the most fascinating tales are those that illuminate the human condition in all its complexity, ambition, and folly. As we stand in the shadow of these towering Gothic cathedrals, let's shift our focus to their enduring legacy. These stone giants have outlasted empires, revolutions, and fashion trends more fickle than a cat's affections. Today, they stand not only as architectural marvels, but as timeless testaments to human ambition, creativity, and let's be honest, our penchant for showing off. First, let's tackle the myth that these cathedrals sprung up from some arcane, divine blueprint. Spoiler alert, they didn't. While it's romantic to imagine architects receiving visions from the heavens, the reality was far more grounded, quite literally. Construction was a painstaking process, often involving trial and error, and occasionally ending in spectacular failure. Remember Beauvais Cathedral's unfortunate collapse. In truth, these marvels were the result of centuries of accumulated knowledge and a lot of elbow grease, not celestial intervention. Take the engineering behind the ribbed vaults and flying buttresses. These weren't just mystical designs whispered by angels. They were practical solutions to the very real problem of gravity. The pointed arches we admire today were as much about structural integrity as they were about aesthetics. They allowed for taller, more luminous buildings that seemed to defy gravity. And while we might romanticize the idea of medieval architects as solitary geniuses, these innovations were more like a collaborative effort across generations, a medieval version of crowdsourcing ingenuity. Speaking of ingenuity, let's talk about the economic engine these cathedrals fueled. They weren't just places of worship. They were economic powerhouses. The sheer scale of resources required, stone, timber, labor, was immense, stimulating local economies in ways that would make modern economic planners swoon. Consider the construction of the Cologne Cathedral, a project that spanned over 600 years, finally completed in 1880. It was a lesson in patience and economic resilience, a reminder that some things are truly worth the wait, or at least worth the centuries of financial investment. Now, about those myths of secret societies and hidden codes. Yes, I'm looking at you, Dan Brown. It's tempting to believe that these cathedrals hide clues to ancient mysteries, but the truth is far more mundane, albeit no less fascinating. The intricate carvings and sculptures that adorn these cathedrals are rich in symbolism, sure, but they were intended to educate the illiterate masses, not conceal esoteric secrets. They were the medieval equivalent of public service announcements, albeit with a bit more flair and a lot more stone. Despite their very earthly origins, the allure of Gothic cathedrals has never waned. They continue to inspire modern architecture, with their influence visible in structures from the spires of the Sagrada Familia to the neo-Gothic design of the Washington National Cathedral. These buildings remind us of the power of human creativity and the desire to reach for the heavens. They are a nod to our ancestors' dreams and a reminder of what can be achieved when ambition meets artistry. But let's not forget the social impact of these architectural wonders. In their heyday, cathedrals were the heart of the community, hosting everything from markets to moral dramas. They were the medieval equivalent of a town hall, theatre, and shopping mall rolled into one. And while we might not gather in cathedral squares to hear the latest news today, their legacy lives on in the way we design and use public spaces. They taught us the value of building for both function and beauty, a lesson that resonates in modern urban design. As we bid adieu to these Gothic giants, let's marvel at their ability to straddle the line between the past and the present. They've withstood the test of time, serving as reminders of an era when human ambition reached for the stars, armed with nothing more than stone, sweat, and an unyielding belief in the possible. And while we may never know all the stories hidden within their walls, one thing is certain. Gothic cathedrals are a legacy of ingenuity that continues to inspire awe and wonder, even in our fast-paced digital world. So, next time you find yourself standing beneath a soaring spire or gazing at a kaleidoscope of stained glass, take a moment to appreciate the countless hands that shaped these masterpieces. Remember the ambition and audacity it took to dream them into existence, and perhaps, as you walk away, you'll carry with you a little of their magic, a reminder that even in a world of concrete and steel, there's still room for dreams carved in stone. In a world teetering on the brink of chaos and modernization, the Gupta Empire rolled in like a well-oiled chariot, ready to steer the subcontinent into a golden age. This empire, which began its journey in the 3rd century CE, wasn't just another blip in the historical timeline. It was the real deal. We're talking about an era when India, as we know it today, was a patchwork quilt of kingdoms, each with its own flavor of drama. Enter the Guptas, with Chandragupta I at the helm. Now, don't confuse him with Chandragupta Maurya, the guy who tangoed with Alexander the Great's leftovers. Chandragupta I was the grand architect of this new dynasty. So, why should anyone care about the Guptas? Well, if the Mauryas were the Beatles, think of the Guptas as the Rolling Stones. They rocked the subcontinent with their own brand of cultural renaissance, art and science. And let's face it, they had a knack for governance that would make any modern political strategist green with envy. The Guptas managed to hold sway over a sizable chunk of India, covering an area that stretched from the Ganges in the north to the Narmada River in the south. Not exactly a stroll in the park, considering the terrain and the number of rival kingdoms vying for power. Chandragupta I, the man of the hour, wasn't born into riches and fame. The Guptas started off as one of many petty principalities scattered across northern India. But Chandragupta had ambition, a commodity as valuable as gold. Through strategic marriages and alliances, he laid the groundwork for what would become one of India's most illustrious empires. He married into the Likhavi dynasty, which was kind of like marrying into the Kardashians of ancient India, if they also controlled a key strategic territory. This alliance not only beefed up his status, but also expanded his control transforming him from a regional player into a continental heavyweight. The Gupta Empire, with its capital in Padalipatra, today's Patna, was like the Silicon Valley of its time. It was a hub of innovation, where scholars and artists rubbed shoulders with merchants and politicians. The empire became a melting pot of ideas, a place where the seeds of Hindu culture, science, and philosophy were sown and nurtured. It was during the Gupta period that the concept of zero emerged, and Aryabhata, the legendary mathematician and astronomer, was born. Talk about a legacy that lasts longer than a Twitter trend. But let's not get too carried away with the romanticism of it all. Family politics were as much a part of the Gupta story as they are in any soap opera worth its salt. The Guptas weren't immune to the classic pitfalls of dynasty building, sibling rivalries, power struggles, and the occasional assassination plot. Chandragupta's successors, like Samudragupta and Chandragupta Roman II, seriously, couldn't they come up with more original names? Had to navigate these treacherous waters. Samudragupta, for instance, was a king whose reign was marked by military conquests and expansion, earning him the nickname Napoleon of India, long before the actual Napoleon decided to make his own mark on history. As the Gupta Empire expanded, it became a patchwork of cultures and languages, a bit like Europe today, but with better weather and spicier food. The empire was a beacon of prosperity, with thriving trade routes that stretched as far as Southeast Asia and the Mediterranean. Gold coins featuring the likeness of Gupta rulers became the currency of choice, reflecting both their wealth and their penchant for self-promotion. The Guptas were like the original influencers, using their coinage to send a message. We're rich, we're cultured, and we're here to stay. Yet, behind the glittering facade, the Guptas had their challenges. Maintaining control over such a vast territory required more than just military might. It needed a delicate balance of diplomacy and administration. The empire was divided into provinces, each governed by a viceroy who reported directly to the emperor. This setup was as much about managing resources as it was about keeping potential rebels in check. It was a system that worked well, until it didn't, because, as history shows, empires have a nasty habit of crumbling under their own weight. As we delve deeper into the Gupta Empire's social structure in the upcoming parts, it's crucial to remember that while they were trailblazers in many ways, they were also products of their time. The caste system was in full swing, and despite the narrative of a golden age, life for the average Gupta citizen was no fairy tale. But that's a story for another day. For now, let's toast to Chandragupta, the man who set the stage for a dynasty that would leave an indelible mark on history. Here's to ambition, strategic marriages, and the glorious chaos of family politics. Cheers. And speaking of the glorious chaos of family politics, let's dive into the social tapestry of the Gupta Empire, where everyone had their designated boxes, literally. This was a time when the caste system was the societal bedrock, ensuring everyone knew their place in the grand scheme of things. Now, before you get too cozy with the idea of a harmonious hierarchy, let's scratch beneath the surface of this supposed utopia. The Brahmins and Kshatriyas were the rock stars of this era, living their best lives at the top of the social food chain. The Brahmins, the priestly class, had a monopoly on spiritual wisdom and rituals that could make or break your afterlife prospects. Think of them as the ancient versions of influencers, but instead of Instagram, they had the Vedas. The Kshatriyas, meanwhile, were the warrior class, defenders of the realm and bearers of the "I've got a sword, and I'm not afraid to use it" vibe. But let's not get too caught up in the high drama of the upper echelons. The real action was happening with the Vaishyas and Shudras, the unsung heroes, and often the underappreciated workforce that kept the Gupta Empire ticking. The Vaishyas were the merchant class, the entrepreneurial spirits who made sure the economy didn't just survive but thrived. They were the ones trading goods like textiles, spices, and for added flair, war elephants. Yes, you heard that right. Elephants were a hot commodity. Selling one of these majestic beasts could set you back about 100,000 dinars, which wasn't exactly chump change in those days. Meanwhile, the Shudras labored away, comprising artisans, farmers, and laborers. They were the backbone of the agrarian economy, toiling in fields that fed the empire. They didn't exactly have a say in their career paths, much like your average gig worker today, hustling multiple jobs to make ends meet. Talk about history repeating itself. The Gupta Empire's caste system was less about social harmony and more about maintaining a status quo that favored, you guessed it, the folks at the top. It was as if the empire had its own version of the glass ceiling, only this one was made of solid stone. Social mobility was about as rare as a snowstorm in Delhi, practically non-existent. Your birth determined your vocation, your social circle, and even your prospects for enlightenment. Talk about a loaded birthright. But let's not romanticize the rigidity of the system without acknowledging its appeal. In a world where chaos was always lurking around the corner, the caste system offered a semblance of order and predictability. It was the empire's way of saying, know your role. And for many, that was a comforting constant in an ever-changing world. The Vaishyas, with their business acumen, were the precursors to today's CEOs. They didn't just trade goods, they traded influence. They were the economic engine that powered the empire's prosperity, opening up trade routes that stretched from the Ganges to the far reaches of the Mediterranean. This bustling trade network wasn't just about bringing in the bling, it was a cultural exchange, a blend of ideas, languages, and even religions. It was globalism before globalism was cool. The Shudras, on the other hand, were the unsung laborers who bore the brunt of the empire's agricultural demands. They were the artisans crafting the beautiful sculptures and temples that still stand today. You might say they were the original blue-collar workers, minus the overtime pay and benefits. It's a reminder that while the Gupta Empire was busy writing its golden chapter in history, not everyone got to share in the spoils. And what about those on the fringes, the outcasts who didn't even fit into the Shudra category? The untouchables, or Dalits, were stuck in a societal limbo, relegated to the dirtiest and least desirable jobs. If you think your job is tough, imagine being tasked with waste disposal sans modern sanitation. These were the folks who had to make do with the crumbs of society while everyone else feasted at the table. Despite these rigid structures, the Gupta era wasn't entirely devoid of social maneuvering. There were whispers of mobility, albeit rare and often cloaked in secrecy. Marriages across caste lines did happen, though they were about as scandalous as a royal affair. And for those with exceptional skills or talents, especially in the arts or sciences, there was a sliver of hope for recognition beyond their birthright. In the grand tapestry of the Gupta Empire, everyone played their part, willingly or otherwise. The caste system, for better or worse, was the glue that held the empire together. It was a world where the rigidity of tradition met the fluidity of economic innovation, a paradox that made the Gupta Empire both a wonder of its time and a cautionary tale for ours. So, as the Gupta Empire hummed along its golden path, it was a stark reminder that beneath every majestic facade, there's a complex web of social dynamics, some as old as time itself. While the Brahmins and Kshatriyas basked in their lofty status, it was the Vaishyas and Shudras who carried the empire on their shoulders, a testament to the enduring human spirit and the eternal quest for a better life, even when the odds are stacked against you. And speaking of carrying the empire on their shoulders, let's roll up our sleeves and dig into what truly fueled the Gupta Empire, its economy. You see, while the Brahmins were busy chanting and the Kshatriyas were sharpening their swords, it was the Vaishyas and Shudras who were the real unsung heroes, keeping the empire's coffers jingling. Think of the Gupta economy like a well-oiled machine, with agriculture as its trusty engine, trade as its fancy chrome finish, and taxation as the fuel that kept it all running. Now, agriculture in the Gupta Empire wasn't just about sowing seeds and praying for rain. No, this was a sophisticated operation. The fertile plains of the Ganges and the Yamuna were like nature's own stockpile, yielding crops that could feed armies and fill storage granaries. Rice, wheat, sugarcane, and cotton were some of the empire's greatest hits. Picture vast fields stretching as far as the eye could see. These were the bread baskets that kept the empire well-fed and robust. Farmers toiled under the sun, their livelihoods hanging on the whims of the monsoon. It's a reminder that while some things change, others, like the unpredictability of the weather, remain as constant as bad hair days. But let's not forget the empire's craftier side. Trade was the star of the show, the glittering jewel in the Gupta crown. The empire's strategic location made it a nexus of commerce, with trade routes that reached from the Indian Ocean to the Mediterranean. Imagine the Gupta Empire as a bustling marketplace, where ideas, goods, and cultures mingled like patrons at an international food fair. Silk from China, spices from the Malabar coast, and gold from the Roman Empire all found their way into the bustling bazaars of Padalipatra and Mathura. It was like Amazon, only without the one-click checkout. Of course, no discussion of Gupta trade would be complete without mentioning the Silk Road. This was the ancient world's version of Route 66, only instead of road tripping in a convertible, merchants braved deserts and mountains with caravans of goods. The Silk Road was a lifeline, connecting the Gupta Empire to Central Asia, China, and beyond. Here, silk wasn't just a fabric. It was the premium currency of its time, much like Bitcoin today, but you could actually wear it. The trade of silk wasn't just about fashion. It was a symbol of prosperity, a tangible testament to the empire's far-reaching influence. Now, while trade was the empire's glamorous side hustle, taxation was the practical backbone that kept it all from toppling over. And oh boy, were the Guptas masters of the tax game. They had a system that would make even modern tax accountants pause for admiration or envy. The empire collected taxes in kind, and while that sounds like a quaint way to gather revenue, it was a sophisticated system. Farmers paid a share of their produce, merchants contributed a portion of their goods, and landowners forked over a percentage of their harvest. It was a bit like a potluck dinner, only mandatory and with a lot more paperwork. And here's the kicker. Taxes were sometimes paid in the form of forced labor, a system known as *Vishti*. Yes, the Guptas were early adopters of the time is money mantra, except it was your time and their money. It was a necessary evil, the empire's way of ensuring roads were built, armies were funded, and the wheels of governance kept turning. But don't worry, even in ancient India, people grumbled about taxes. Some things really are universal. Now let's talk about profit. The Guptas, like any savvy entrepreneurs, understood that commerce wasn't just about survival, it was about thriving. They minted coins like the modern equivalent of printing money, each one bearing the likeness of a Gupta ruler, a not-so-subtle reminder of who was in charge. These coins weren't just currency, they were propaganda, a way to broadcast the empire's wealth and power to anyone who came into contact with them. Picture it as a historical Instagram post, screaming, "Look how fabulous we are." But beneath the glittering surface of trade and commerce lay the harsh realities of economic disparity. While the elite dined on imported delicacies, the common folk often struggled to make ends meet. The taxes that funded grandiose temples and palaces were the same taxes that sometimes left farmers with empty granaries. Yet it was this intricate dance of trade, agriculture, and taxation that created a tapestry of wealth and power, elevating the Gupta Empire to legendary status. So, as we marvel at the Gupta Empire's economic prowess, it's essential to recognize the duality of their success. While their achievements in trade and commerce were undeniably impressive, they were also a testament to the age-old human pursuit of profit, sometimes at the expense of equity. As we continue to unravel the complexities of the Gupta Empire, remember that behind every tale of prosperity, there's a story of struggle, a delicate balance between ambition and reality, between the dream of empire and the lives of those who built it. Stay tuned, because there's more history to unearth, more myths to debunk, and more stories to tell. Now, while we've been busy dissecting the economic engine of the Gupta Empire, let's shift gears and cruise into the intellectual autobahn of this so-called Golden Age. Because folks, if you think the Guptas were only about coins and conquests, you're in for a cerebral treat. This was an era where brains were as prized as brawn, and the empire wasn't just building roads, it was paving the way for some serious scholarly swagger. Let's start with Aryabhata, the rock-star mathematician and astronomer who was basically the Einstein of 5th century India. Born in 476 CE, Aryabhata was calculating the circumference of the Earth long before flat Earth theories were a thing. He didn't just dabble in numbers, he practically invented them, giving us the concept of zero. Yes, zero, our favorite placeholder, the unsung hero of modern mathematics, the thing that makes your bank balance look depressing. Aryabhata was a trailblazer in trigonometry too, laying the groundwork for sine and cosine long before they became the bane of high school math students everywhere. But Aryabhata wasn't just a numbers guy. He had his eyes on the stars, calculating the solar year to within minutes of the actual value, a feat that would make any modern astronomer do a double take. His work, the Aryabhatiya, was a compendium of knowledge, a testament to human curiosity and the relentless pursuit of understanding the universe. It's a bit like your favorite encyclopedia, only with fewer pictures and a lot more Sanskrit. While Aryabhata was busy gazing at the stars, a certain poet named Kalidasa was weaving tales that would outlast empires. Often hailed as the Shakespeare of India, Kalidasa's works are still celebrated for their lyrical beauty and emotional depth. His play, Shakuntala, is a love story that's the stuff of Bollywood dreams, complete with misunderstandings, divine interventions, and a happily ever after that would make even the most jaded romantic swoon. Kalidasa's poetry was an exploration of human emotions, a dance of words that captured the essence of love, loss, and everything in between. Now, if you're wondering how these intellectual heavyweights fit into the broader Gupta narrative, it's all about context, my friends. The Guptas, wise as they were, understood that a thriving culture was as vital as a robust economy. They were patrons of the arts and sciences, fostering an environment where ideas could flourish and creativity could run wild. This wasn't just about prestige. It was a strategic move to cement their legacy as rulers of a truly enlightened empire. But hold your horses before you start picturing the Gupta era as an idyllic utopia of scholars and poets sipping tea and debating philosophy. The reality was a bit more nuanced. For every Aryabhata and Kalidasa, there were countless others whose contributions have been lost to the sands of time. The Golden Age was golden for some, but not necessarily for all. Education was largely the privilege of the elite, those with the means and connections to access the rich tapestry of knowledge being woven at the time. For the average Gupta citizen, life was still a grind, more about survival than scholarly pursuits. And let's not gloss over the darker undercurrents. The caste system still dictated who had access to education and who didn't. The Brahmins, with their monopoly on spiritual and intellectual life, were the gatekeepers of knowledge, deciding who got to learn and who was left in the intellectual dust. It's a sobering reminder that even in an age of enlightenment, knowledge was power, and that power was tightly controlled. Yet, despite these contradictions, the intellectual achievements of the Gupta period remain a testament to human ingenuity. They were building the foundations of modern thought, one theorem, one poem, and one observation at a time. It was an era that celebrated the mind, even if the celebration wasn't as widespread as we'd like to imagine. In the grand tapestry of history, the Gupta Empire was a vibrant thread, weaving together art, science, and literature in a way that would echo through the ages. It was a time when ideas were currency, and the quest for knowledge was a journey without end. As we continue our exploration of this fascinating era, remember that behind every tale of intellectual triumph lies a story of struggle and ambition, a reminder that the pursuit of knowledge is as timeless as the stars themselves. So, as we marvel at the mathematical marvels and poetic prowess of the Gupta Empire, let's keep peeling back the layers of this historical onion. There's more to uncover, more myths to debunk, and more stories to tell. Stay tuned as we journey deeper into the heart of this enigmatic empire, where every discovery brings us closer to the truth, and every revelation is a reminder that history is as complex and captivating as the people who lived it. Now, as we continue our deep dive into the Gupta tapestry, let's address the elephant in the room, or should I say, the elephant on the battlefield. The decline of the Gupta Empire is often framed as a sudden collapse, akin to a dramatic fall from grace. But in reality, it was more of a slow, bureaucratic unraveling, the kind that makes you wish they had invented coffee to keep things moving. First off, let's lay to rest the myth of the instantaneous demise. The Gupta Empire didn't just implode overnight like a poorly constructed house of cards. It was more like watching a slow-motion car crash, agonizingly drawn out, with plenty of warning signs that everyone conveniently ignored. By the time the writing was on the wall, it was already too late to call for backup. One of the primary culprits behind the Gupta Empire's decline was the classic one-two punch of invasions and economic struggles. The empire faced external threats from the Hunas, a group of Central Asian nomads who were like the uninvited guests at a party, persistent, aggressive, and impossible to ignore. Around the middle of the 5th century, the Hunas began their incursions into the Gupta territories, and it was clear they weren't interested in just sampling the local cuisine. They wanted a piece of the action, and they weren't taking no for an answer. These invasions were more than just a military headache. They were a drain on the Empire's already stretched resources. Imagine trying to plug a leaky boat while someone keeps poking more holes in it. That's what the Guptas were dealing with. The cost of constant warfare and defense was astronomical, and the treasury began to feel the pinch. When your empire is hemorrhaging money faster than you can replenish it, the end is pretty much spelled out in capital letters. But let's not pretend it was all the Huna's fault. Internally, the empire was grappling with its own demons. The rigid social hierarchy that had once been its strength started to look more like a liability. The caste system, as much as it provided stability, also stifled innovation and adaptation. When you're stuck in a system that doesn't allow for much upward mobility, motivation to innovate tends to plummet. It's hard to come up with groundbreaking ideas when you're busy trying to break out of your social cage. The provincial governors, or viceroys, who had once been the empire's key administrators, began to act more like independent rulers. With the central government's influence waning, these regional leaders saw an opportunity to expand their own power bases. It was a classic case of the tail wagging the dog, with provincial leaders prioritizing their ambitions over the empire's collective interests. This internal dissent further weakened the empire's unity, making it easier for external forces to exploit the cracks in its armor. Economically, the empire found itself in a downward spiral. The trade routes that had once been its lifeblood were no longer as secure or profitable. The Huna's disruptions, combined with the internal strife, meant that the vibrant market exchanges that had sustained the empire's wealth were increasingly drying up. And let's face it, when your economy is in the doldrums, it's hard to keep up appearances as a world power. Now, here's where it gets particularly juicy, if by juicy you mean disheartening. The Gupta Empire's decline wasn't just a series of unfortunate events. It was a testament to the fragile nature of power structures built on inequality and exclusivity. The very social order that had allowed the Guptas to rise to prominence became their Achilles heel. The rigid hierarchy meant that when push came to shove, there wasn't enough flexibility or innovation to adapt to new challenges. It's a lesson in the dangers of resting on your laurels, thinking that what worked yesterday will work just as well tomorrow. As the sun set on the Gupta Empire, leaving behind a legacy of art, science, and culture, it also left us with sobering lessons about the impermanence of power. The tale of the Guptas, with all its grandeur and eventual decline, is a reminder that no empire, no matter how golden its age, is immune to the relentless march of time and the cyclical nature of history. In today's world, the story of the Gupta Empire resonates with eerie familiarity. We see echoes of its challenges in our own societies: social stratification, economic inequality, and the tensions between central authority and regional autonomy. It's a stark reminder that while history might not repeat itself verbatim, it certainly rhymes. So, as we wrap up our journey through the Gupta Empire, remember this: every empire is a delicate balancing act between ambition and reality. The Guptas, like so many before and after them, soared to great heights only to fall prey to the very systems they built. Their story is a testament to human ingenuity and folly, a golden age that shone brightly but ultimately flickered out, leaving us with lessons as timeless as the stars Aryabhata once studied. And there you have it, folks, the rise and fall of the Gupta Empire, an odyssey of ambition, innovation, and the eternal dance between power and the people it governs. A tale of a golden age that reminds us of the enduring human struggle to create, conquer, and ultimately to learn. Cheers to the Guptas, to history, and to the stories that continue to shape our world today.